Jesse was once a notorious top marksman in the underworld. However, because of his promise to his father, he chose to give up sin. Jesse then returned to his hometown and became a missionary. Although he tried his best to spread the religion, the believers always remembered his past and treated him coldly. Jesse himself always doubted that he could not handle this responsibility, but what he did not expect was that he was chosen to be the spokesman for God. Every word he said would become law. At the same time, a private plane just flew over the town's sky. At this time, in the passenger cabin, everyone was drinking happily. Flight attendant Casty went to the bathroom to relieve himself, but he accidentally discovered a Bible on the cabinet next to him. Casty immediately felt something was wrong, because he was a vampire who had lived for thousands of years. When he saw the Bible appear, Casty immediately realized that the people outside were probably vampire hunters who wanted to capture him. Then, when he saw the sun outside the window about to rise, he decided to make the first move. He used a flamethrower to repel the approaching hunters. Then, with his agile movements, he toyed with the group of people in the palm of his hand. As a vampire who had lived for thousands of years, Casty was completely superior to these hunters under the surprise attack. A moment later, Casty had severely injured everyone. When he wanted to know how these people had followed him, one of the hunters stood up and poured holy water on him. Casty immediately turned around and sarcastically said that the other person must have watched too many cartoons. Only after Casty had sucked his fill of blood did he realize that the plane had lost control and was about to fall. So he hurriedly found a bottle filled with hemoglobin and opened the emergency exit. When he saw the ground tens of thousands of meters away, he grabbed an umbrella and jumped down. Obviously, this method was completely ineffective. He had anticipated that he would be seriously injured and had even prepared human blood. However, this little bit of nourishment was completely insufficient to restore his crippled body. Fortunately, there was a bush of grass that helped Casty block the sunlight on his upper body. If he didn't die from the fall, he would also have been burned alive. Just as Casty was at a loss for words, a cute cow came over. Seeing the large blood bag in front of him, he immediately pulled it into the pit. After swallowing the blood of the cow, Casty grew back his limbs and restored his crippled body. Then he went to a bar and coincidentally met Jesse, who was drinking alone to drown his sorrows. The two of them felt like they had known each other for a long time, so they started chatting. But just then, a few big guys walked in. The leader seemed to have a conflict with Jesse, so he immediately stepped forward and punched him. Jesse was knocked down, but did not fight back because he was a missionary of Jesus. According to the doctrine, when you are hit on the left cheek, you must also offer the right cheek. However, this made the other man even more aggressive, and he even insulted Jesse's father. This action immediately made him angry. Jesse immediately warned that guy not to mention his father, because that would force Jesse to send the man to God. He was also sure that the other man was about to die. As a former golden gunman, once Jesse fought back, the other men were like chickens waiting to be slaughtered, completely unable to resist. The police chief standing nearby wanted to intervene to stop the noisy drama, but Jesse completely ignored him. Moreover, he even sarcastically asked the police chief if he wanted to see the color of human bones. As a result, Jesse and Casty were both taken to the police station. When Casty saw the brutal pastor beside him, he became very interested in him. However, Jesse was released on bail soon after. This time, Jesse was even more convinced that he could not become a good missionary. Just as Jesse was returning to the church alone, just as he was lighting a cigarette to calm his mind, Genus quietly appeared. His fate changed completely from then on. In order to show his sincerity to the girl in front of him, a man even cut out his own heart. The woman who witnessed it was terrified. The action stemmed from Jesse's words, telling the other party to show their heart to express their love. Thanks to the power that made words come true, the man died because of his own love. In fact, after Genus blew up one priest after another, it finally found Jesse's church. Before he could react, the power had already entered his body. By the time Jesse woke up again, it was already 3 days later, and he had miraculously survived. At this time, Jesse still didn't know that he had just gone through death's door, and he didn't know that he had obtained the power that even God feared. He still sat with Casty, drinking wine in the church. The two of them were enemies from the moment they met. Not long after, Jesse noticed Casty's bottle of wine and expressed that he wanted to try a little. However, Casty frankly said that the formula of this wine was very special, and a mortal like Jesse could not drink it at all. On the contrary, Jesse did not believe in evil spirits. He immediately snatched the bottle of wine from Casty's hand. Seeing this, Casty was forced to reveal that he was a vampire, and that the wine was not for ordinary people. He also warned that if Jesse drank it, he would probably only be able to stand for 3 seconds, but Jesse did not think about it and immediately drank it all. As expected, in exactly 3 seconds, Jesse passed out on the floor. Apparently, although Genus had given him the ability to make words come true, it did not help him escape his mortal body. Casty reluctantly took the money from Jesse to prepare to buy more alcohol. However, as soon as he left, a pair of foolish angels walked straight into the church. These were the ones sent by heaven to pursue Genus. They took advantage of Jesse's coma to take out a mysterious box and tried to forcefully extract Genus from his body. Despite trying everything, the results were still ineffective. Derblank even suspected that this divine item from heaven was broken. When they saw that the soft method was not effective, the other two decided to use the strong method. Derblank immediately took out a chainsaw and prepared to saw Jesse to dig Genus out. At this time, Casty had just returned from buying alcohol. When he saw the two, he thought they were vampire hunters. He immediately declared that if anything happened, just aim at him, and if he didn't beat them to death, he would rather be a dog. However, Derblank didn't follow the rules and immediately shot Casty in the face. However, Casty was a vampire and wouldn't die even if he fell from a height of tens of thousands of meters, let alone a small bullet. He pretended to be about to die, and when Derblank approached to shoot, he immediately counterattacked and suddenly pinned the angel to the ground. Thanks to his regenerative power, Casty firmly sent the two angels back to heaven. Their blood then became a source of energy to help him recover from his injuries. In order not to cause more trouble for Jesse, he chopped up the two foolish angels' bodies, put them in a barrel, and buried them in a large hole. He thought everything was over, but the next scene took place in a motel in town. The police chief was investigating the identity of the two mysterious people. It turned out that angels could not be killed, at least not by human power. After being reborn, the two angels carried a great deal of resentment. However, when they came to Earth, all their powers were sealed, so they could only use human methods to demand justice. After the police chief left, the two men immediately pulled out a bunch of weapons, intending to directly break into the church to kill Casty and retrieve Genus. But just as they were about to step out of the church, they were hit and killed by Casty's car. At first, Casty thought they were vampire hunters, but when he saw their faces clearly, he was shocked to realize that these were the two people whose bodies he had dismembered and buried. He returned to the church in a daze, taking his tools to bury them again, but suddenly, footsteps echoed in the church. Casty immediately picked up his stick and walked out into the darkness. Unexpectedly, in front of him were still the two angels. Too scared, he immediately swung his stick and attacked fiercely. At that moment, Derblank, who was standing outside watching, spoke up to stop him. The two angels then frankly revealed their identities and affirmed that Genus was an evil force. If heaven did not take it back, Jesse and the entire Earth would be in danger of being destroyed. Upon hearing that, Casty realized that this was a matter related to his friend's lives, so he agreed to help them persuade Jesse, but on the condition that they absolutely could not harm him. After all, there was still God in heaven, and none of them could easily resist. As a missionary and possessing the ability to make words come true, how could Jesse give up so easily? Meanwhile, in another corner of town, Julian, a young man with a mouth deformed like a daisy, was experiencing his own misfortune. The townspeople did not sympathize with him, but every day they harshly mocked him. They even put a gun in his bedroom to force him to end his life early. Even Julian's father, the director of the bureau, was implicated because of his son, and he could not hold his head up in front of the people. He often vented his anger on Julian, and every time he drank, he that would say cruel words to his son to die. Julian could only silently endure everything from beginning to end without any resentment, because in the past, just an accident had caused him to accidentally turn a girl into a vegetative person. After that, Julian blamed himself very much. He intended to shoot himself to atone for his sins. However, he had not died, but his handsome face had been destroyed and deformed into a terrible scar. To erase his sins, Julian went to Father Jesse. In the past, this priest always listened to him confide, then gently comforted him. However, this time was different. Jesse decided to use the power of God that he believed he possessed to completely resolve Julian's sadness. It turned out that the night before, a thug in town had blocked Jesse in the restroom and held a gun to force him to kneel down. However, Jesse at this time was no longer the weak priest he used to be. The thug's coercion had accidentally activated his ability to make his words his command. With this miracle, Jesse almost made the thug end up on the spot. If Jesse hadn't promptly withdrawn his thoughts in time, the other person would have died long ago. Thanks to that, the thug who was lucky enough to escape immediately cried bitterly and ran outside. At that moment, Jesse completely understood the ability that he possessed. He vowed to use this ability in conjunction with his missionary career to better spread the teachings of Christianity. Jesse then told Casty about his ability. However, Casty only mocked him, saying that a mere mortal dared to dream of such a thing. Seeing this, Jesse immediately took control of him, forcing Casty to dance and sing continuously and finally forcing him to fly. But because vampires cannot fly, Casty immediately banged his head hard against the wall. At this moment, Casty was stunned. He did not expect that the friend he casually made friends with would be such a powerful person. Jesse immediately expressed his feelings. He thought that this was the power that God had given him, and at the same time, he felt that everything in the world seemed to be in his body. At that time, Jesse was still naive and believed that this was a true blessing from God. He even considered Genus's power as God's power. Therefore, he decided to use that power to make the town better. Meanwhile, Casty originally intended to persuade Jesse to hand over Genus on behalf of the angels. However, before he could open his mouth, Jesse left. He decided to hold a large sermon at the church to attract the villagers. However, Jesse was still worried that there would be too few people attending because people were always prejudiced against him. In order to expand his influence, Jesse sought out Odin, the richest man in town. Odin used to believe in religion, but later he realized that money still had to be earned by himself, and from then on he lost faith. Jesse made a bet with Odin that if he would come to church on Sunday to listen to sermons, he would definitely return to God's embrace once again. To ensure success, he even used the church's land as a bet. He made it clear that if Odin still did not believe in God, he would give Odin the land. Faced with such an attractive condition, Odin immediately agreed. Sure enough, on Sunday, the church became crowded with people. At this moment, Jesse seemed to have transformed into a completely different person. Under his confident speech, everyone in the audience expressed their agreement one by one. However, when he asked Odin if he believed in God, Odin still firmly refused. The situation became extremely awkward for a moment. Seeing that Jesse was about to lose the bet, he was forced to use his ability to turn words into commands, and then asked Odin again if he was willing to serve God. At that time, Odin immediately answered affirmatively. Seemingly without hesitation, he expressed why he did not believe in God. At that moment, the surrounding audience immediately felt shocked and could not believe it. From then on, Odin's personality changed significantly. Under the mayor's arrangement, he began to cooperate with the sworn enemy in the neighboring town. The mayor was extremely happy with Odin's change, and his heart was also filled with gratitude towards Jesse. However, Odin only maintained a gentle appearance. After exchanging a few words with everyone, he immediately got down to business. In the end, he killed the entire top management of the rival company. Immediately, the mayor next to him was so scared that he peed his pants. He kept wondering how Odin, who believed in God and loved peace, could commit such a brutal act. In another development, Jesse also brought Julian to meet the girl's mother. When the woman saw the person who had harmed her daughter, she immediately lost control of her emotions. She held a baseball bat and tried to beat Julian to death and even smashed Jesse's car. Seeing that the situation was out of control, Jesse was forced to use his powers. From then on, the woman could no longer control her body, but her mouth kept asking about Julian's relatives. In the end, Jesse had to force her to forgive Julian. The people around were once again surprised because they had just witnessed a woman full of hatred could also let go of grudges. Many people began to doubt that Jesse might really be the voice of God. In another development, Julian was sitting drinking tea, but on the table were words insulting him. At this moment, a few boys came over with trays of food. At first, everyone thought that Julian would be bullied. However, the group of boys enthusiastically sat down with him. When school was over, they called Julian back again. After much hesitation, Julian finally followed them. They took Julian to an abandoned construction site. Just when Julian thought they were going to beat him up, the group of teenagers took him to a sewer where they had prepared fireworks. They lit fireworks to have fun with Julian. Thanks to that, Julian finally got rid of his inferiority complex when being with people. After dealing with Julian's matter, Jesse returned to the restaurant and continued to help the believers solve their troubles. However, the police chief unexpectedly brought two angel brothers to find him. The reason was because Jesse often used Genus, making them extremely worried that he would be assimilated by this force and make a big mistake. At the same time, they also thought that the intermediary, Casty, was not trustworthy. After some consideration, the two angels decided to get straight to the point. They frankly said that they were angels from heaven, and their mission was to retrieve Genus that existed in Jesse's body. Only then did Jesse suddenly realize the truth. What was in his body was not the power of God at all, but in fact an evil force born from the forbidden combination of angels and demons. The two angels were afraid that the force would get out of control, so they begged Jesse to hand it over. However, while talking, Fior suddenly saw a blonde woman nearby. He immediately secretly informed Durblank. The two quickly left their seats and went outside. While Jesse was still looking suspiciously, he caught sight of the two angels torturing a woman. Jesse saw this and angrily rushed out with the intention of rescuing the opponent. However, what he did not expect was that the woman lying on the ground was the real danger. In just a moment, the opponent stood up, grabbed Jesse's neck with one hand, and conveniently killed Durblank, who was standing next to him. In the critical situation, Fior was forced to shoot and blow the woman's head to pieces. At this time, Jesse was still bewildered, completely not understanding what had just happened. While everyone was still confused about how to deal with the body on the ground, a holy light suddenly flashed in the restaurant. Immediately after, the woman who had just died reappeared completely before them. The two angels saw this scene and were immediately forced to take Jesse away to escape. It turned out that the woman was a six-winged angel from heaven. Therefore, she also had the ability to regenerate infinitely, like the two angel brothers. Because these two people could not get Genus back, heaven was clearly no longer satisfied. Therefore, they sent down to earth a more powerful six-winged angel, with the purpose of quickly capturing Genus in Jesse's body. However, the two angel brothers absolutely could not let her succeed, because if Genus was brought back, they would most likely be demoted miserably and even have to clean the toilets. The three people who were lucky enough to escape death at that time decided to immediately take Genus in Jesse's body, then return to heaven to submit the mission. But at that moment, the doorbell suddenly rang unexpectedly. Fior immediately stepped forward to check, but ended up getting shot in the head. The six-winged angel had caught up so quickly, only saw that she kicked the door open, then shoot Durblank away with another shot. Jesse witnessed this scene, but was still not afraid. He charged straight forward, even though he fully understood that a weak priest like himself could not be a match for the six-winged angel, especially even though all of her divine power had been sealed. Fortunately, because the six-winged angel was worried that killing Jesse would cause Genus to escape, she did not act really cruelly. She only intended to cripple Jesse to control him. But at that moment, Fior, who had just died, revived. He immediately rushed forward, launched a flying kick, and knocked the six-winged angel to the ground. Just like that, the three people who didn't die, and one person who wasn't afraid of death, rushed into a fierce battle with each other. The three angels only needed to be killed, and the next second they would immediately revive on the spot, along with their continuous resurrection and death. Death and resurrection. The ground was soon filled with corpses. It was unclear how much time had passed, but the three of them finally controlled the six-winged angel. At that moment, Casty suddenly appeared again and thoughtfully fired another shot to send the six-winged angel away from the world. He sneered that they were fighting, but didn't call him. Those words made the whole group want to kill him, because thanks to Casty, they had to continue fighting for several more hours. In the end, with the advantage in numbers, they once again controlled the six-winged angel. However, it was this noisy battle that made Jesse realize the importance of Genus, so he decided not to hand over Genus for the time being. The two angel brothers were stunned when they heard this. However, even they were completely unable to resist Genus's power. The ability to make words come true forced the two poor angel brothers to stand still, stiffly watching Jesse leave. Jesse then returned to the church. Unexpectedly, Julian, the boy with a face like a daisy, had been waiting for him all morning. It's turned out that ever since the last time, when Jesse used Genus's power to force Mrs. Rocher, who hated not being able to kill Julian, to forgive him, Julian had suspected Jesse of doing something shady. Therefore, this time, Julian came to ask Jesse to get Mrs. Rocher's forgiveness. Because Mrs. Rocher's daughter was turned into a vegetative person by Julian himself, he didn't want the old lady to reluctantly forgive him. However, Jesse didn't think so. He believed that if God had given him this power, then everything he did was God's will. Absolutely impossible. Therefore, the two of them had different opinions, leading to a big argument. Julian angrily said that this was just brainwashing and deception, while Jesse replied that he was deliberately causing trouble. Since being possessed by Genus, Jesse has become increasingly hot-tempered and gradually lost his mind. In his anger, he cursed Julian, calling him a damn button-faced bastard, and forced him to hell. When he realized he had said too much, Julian had already disappeared from behind him. Only then did Jesse realize that he had accidentally used Genus's power, directly sending Julian to hell. However, after a brief moment of self-reproach, Jesse regained his cold demeanor. He walked out of the church with an expressionless face. It was clear that Genus, along with the times he had used it, had gradually assimilated and invaded Jesse's inner self. What kind of reason could make a vampire willingly risk his own life, stepping out into the blazing sunlight, hoping to use his death to awaken his brother who had gone astray? Under the intense ultraviolet rays, Casty's entire naked body began to burn fiercely. Only after witnessing this terrible scene did Jesse believe that Casty was really a vampire. Looking at Casty burning with no trace of his flesh left intact, Jesse's conscience finally slowly awakened, so he immediately returned to the church. Here, he dug the floor while using the power of Genus to to try to summon Julian back from hell. However, even though he shouted until his voice was hoarse, all his efforts were in vain. Just as Jesse was sinking into despair, the floor suddenly made noises. He immediately suspected that the summoning might have worked. Sure enough, a hand suddenly rose from the ground. Jesse used all his strength to pull the hand up, and before his eyes was Julian, the person he had accidentally sent to hell. Seeing that the other party had returned safely, Jesse breathed a sigh of relief. Julian had just appeared and was extremely thirsty. Because he had been in hell for several days without a drop of water, he drank 3 large glasses in a row before feeling refreshed. Meanwhile, Jesse kept apologizing, hoping that Julian could forgive him. However, Julian did not care at all because he believed that Jesse did not do it on purpose. Immediately after, Jesse suddenly discovered that the cup of water that Julian had just drunk was still full. Only then did he suddenly realize that Julian had not been saved at all. The person in front of him was only a soul, while his physical body was still trapped in hell. Realizing that Genus's power was only half effective, Jesse, in order to save Julian, sought out the 2 foolish angel brothers. He expressed his desire for an exchange. He would hand over Genus in exchange for them helping him rescue Julian from hell. Faced with such a lucrative opportunity, the 2 angel brothers immediately agreed. After a while of preparation, the 2 began to sing the hymn. It turned out that Genus was especially fond of music. As the hymn gradually reached its climax, a powerful force surged out from Jesse's body and was quickly sealed into the Holy Spirit by the 2 angel brothers. Just like that, the 2 angel brothers finally succeeded in taking possession of Genus. Jesse thought that Julian would be rescued immediately. However, beyond his expectations, the 2 angels did not fulfill their promise. After receiving the gift, they calmly brushed their hands and left. Because Jesse had lost Genus's power at this time, he could not do anything to the 2 angels. However, the bottle that sealed Genus was suddenly broken. This time, Jesse was completely finished. That stream of power once again rushed in and entered his body. The 2 angel brothers saw the damaged vase and immediately understood that they no longer had the ability to retrieve Genus and had even accidentally offended the host. In this situation, they knew that negotiations had become meaningless. Therefore, the 2 could only take advantage of the time when Jesse was still adjusting to the power to quickly leave. However, the 2 angel brothers clearly would not give up easily. In order to deal with the force hiding in Jesse's body, they immediately bought tickets to hell, determined to find the strongest man to ask for help. At this time, Center was suffering from endless reincarnation. He had died and come back to life countless times. When the 2 angels found him, they made a proposal. In exchange for helping Center escape the 1,000-year cycle of reincarnation, he had to help them kill Jesse and get Genus back. Center was dissatisfied after hearing this. He told the 2 angels to say something quickly. However, because Genus was so important, Derblanc deliberately kept it a secret and refused to reveal more. Unexpectedly, the result was beyond expectation. Center immediately shot Derblanc dead with a gun. Under that threat, Fior was forced to quickly confess the whole truth. Just like that, the 2 angels and Center reached a cooperation agreement. However, after that, only Fiore returned to the mortal world. It turned out that after being shot dead by Center's gun, even angels could not be revived. This was worse for Fiore than agreeing to Jesse's exchange terms. In another development, Odin was being forced by Jesse to believe in God through the power of Genus, but after Genus temporarily left Jesse's body, he was freed from the control of the ability to make words become law. When Odin regained consciousness, he no longer believed in God, so he decided to take the land of the church as agreed. However, no matter how foolish he was, Odin still understood that Jesse always had mystical powers to protect him. To capture Jesse, his subordinate Donnie, who had once nearly been forced by Jesse to end his own life, decided to pierce his eardrums, turning himself into a deaf man. Indeed, from that moment on, Donnie was immune to Jesse's power of words. However, even after becoming a prisoner in Odin's hands, Jesse still decided to bet with him once more. This time, he bet with his own life. To make Odin truly believe, Jesse resolutely chose to summon God. The next day, Jesse gathered everyone in town and announced that he wanted to summon God in front of them. At that time, he relied on the phone that the 2 angel brothers had left. However, Jesse fumbled around for a while but still had no reaction. Therefore, the people who already did not believe now laugh even more. Odin even stood up to disrupt the situation, making the situation more chaotic. At that moment, the sky suddenly darkened. Immediately after, a bright light shone straight down from the sky. Under the witness of all the people, God appeared clearly and vividly before their eyes. As soon as he appeared, God questioned why humans summoned him. At that time, Jesse took the opportunity to ask questions. He wanted to know why humans had hatred and greed, as well as why humans were forced to die. In response, God explains that death is not the end. atonement, but only a rebirth. He affirmed that everyone who dies will be saved and live forever in heaven. After these words were heard, the crowd immediately below became restless. However, Jesse alone felt that something was wrong. He tried to ask God if Julian was in heaven. Surprisingly, God bluntly admits that Julian was there. This surprised Jesse, because he clearly remembered that Julian had been sent to hell by him. Moreover, there was a trace of tension on God's face, which made Jesse even more suspicious. Upon closer observation, he was certain that the God in front of him was just an imposter, so Jesse immediately used the power of Genus to question the whereabouts of the real God. Under the pressure of this power, the imposter immediately confessed honestly. He confessed that the real God had long disappeared, and he himself was just a puppet pushed out by heaven to cover up the public eye. When the truth was exposed, the fake God was immediately taken away by two angels. That strange call ended. The townspeople fell into despair when they heard that God had disappeared. The belief they had relied on all their lives was completely shattered because they realized that there was no God in heaven. At the same time, in the town, due to the accumulation of fertilizer for a long time, methane gas also accumulated in large quantities. The power reactor therefore issued a warning every 3 hours, requiring someone to promptly release the gas to reduce the pressure. However, the manager that day suddenly died due to being too excited about the event that had just happened. Therefore, the methane gas reservoir was not released and began to spew gas all over the town. Finally, when the pressure in the reactor reached its limit, the entire town was leveled by a violent explosion. As a result, all the residents here were killed, not a single survivor. However, the six-winged angel, who had been imprisoned by the two angel brothers, died and was revived by this explosion. Before she could react, a mysterious man shot her from behind. The shooter was none other than the center of hell. Meanwhile, Jesse and his companions appeared in another town. It turned out that after hearing the news of God's disappearance, they decided to set off to search for the real God. On the way, Casty ran into trouble when a traffic officer ordered him to fold his sun umbrella under the scorching sunlight. At this time, Casty helplessly tried to apply sunscreen first. However, this action made the police think he was going to pull out a weapon. Before he could explain, a policeman rushed over and pressed Casty down. Then the traffic police took the initiative to cover Casty with an umbrella, only for his body to actually start burning under the sunlight. As soon as the police chief ran over, he immediately threw the umbrella away, causing Casty to hastily open the door and rush into the police car. The people around were extremely surprised to see him smoking. However, the police chief still did not believe and insisted on pulling Casty out of the car. In a situation where there was no other way, Jesse was forced to use his Genus power to give orders. He forced the police officers to obediently stop the car on the side of the road and put away their guns. Then Jesse controlled them, forcing the police chief to stand aside. It turned out that on the way to find God, because they drove too fast, the group of three were noticed and chased by the traffic police. Thanks to the skillful driving skills of their new friend Tulip, they easily lost the police encirclement. However, God did not favor her. Her car ran out of gas, and Jesse's group was arrested on the spot. Back in the present, Jesse used Genus to order everyone to stand in a line to punish the police chief. Jesse controlled him, forcing him to use pepper spray directly on his little boy. When he saw the police officer's dazed face, Jesse knew for sure that he had been in pain. At that time, he even teased the people around him and prepared to leave. At that moment, a police officer was suddenly shot in the head by a cold gun from afar. Immediately after that, countless bullets flew in. Realizing the dangerous situation, Jesse immediately released control over everyone. However, the traffic police, who were about to resist, were accurately shot through the head one by one. Not a single bullet missed. When they saw that the entire police force had been destroyed, the group of three were forced to quickly drive away. But when the dust cleared, someone appeared behind them. That person was none other than Center from Hell, who was preparing to kill Jesse and take Genus back for the angel. Jesse's group then drove away to a gas station. When they confirmed that Center couldn't keep up, the three finally breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment, the gas station employee discovered a piece of human intestine hanging from their car. The old manager was so scared that he turned around and ran away, intending to call the police. Seeing this, Jesse once again pushed Genus to make the old man pretend he hadn't seen anything. Taking the opportunity, Casty also used the old man's cat to heal the wound on his body. However, as soon as the three people left, Center walked and quickly caught up. Just then, the gas station owner also stepped out to look for his cat. Center suddenly appeared right behind him. He coldly asked the old man if he saw Jesse's group, but because he had been controlled by Genus, the gas station owner was completely unable to answer. Seeing this, Center did not hesitate and pulled out the old man's woman's tongue with his own hands. In another development, Jesse's group also went to a church. The priest here was a good friend of Jesse's father, and also the person who guided him, and he was one of the few people on earth who could directly communicate with God. Jesse wanted to ask this priest about news of God, but he also did not know the situation. Many years ago, God stopped answering him. At night, Jesse went out alone to smoke to relieve his sadness. At that time, the priest brought a glass of wine and walked to him. The two began to talk very well. During the conversation, Jesse even revealed that he possessed the power of Genus. However, the priest still did not believe it, because according to him, the existence of Genus was too difficult to accept. Only when Jesse controlled him to break the glass of wine in his hand did the priest completely believe in what he had just said. When he saw Jesse become so miraculous, the priest, after thinking carefully, took out a business card from his pocket. He recounted that a few weeks ago he met a woman. The woman's whole body had been shaking, and she had said that she had seen God. At that time, the priest had thought that the woman had been drunk and hallucinating, but now he realized that it could be the moment God descended to earth. The next morning, after getting the clue, Jesse's group immediately set out to find the woman. However, shortly after they left, Center once again followed the trail. The priest seemed to have sensed his presence. He was not in a hurry, but slowly poured himself a glass of wine. When Center stepped in front of him and was about to interrogate him, the priest directly used a dagger to stab himself in the heart. Determined not to reveal Jesse's group's whereabouts, the priest left on his own to keep the secret. Meanwhile, Jesse had no idea what had happened to the priest. He and his teammates found the woman. According to her story, God had really come to her store a few months ago, but at that time, he had only ordered a song and then had quietly left. After that time, the woman had never seen God again. So, although Jesse's group had a clue, the clue was quickly cut off. That night, Jesse was once again upset and went out to smoke to relieve stress. But unexpectedly, a figure appeared on the dark road. When she realized that the other party had come with bad intentions, Jesse immediately used Genus. However, the words that were always effective lost their effect. Center was not only not controlled, but could even stand a few hundred meters away and shoot an accurate shot. The people living nearby heard the noise and rushed over one after another with their weapons. At first, they thought that Center had been hit by a truck and killed, but just a second later, he came out unharmed. Everyone around was extremely shocked to see this scene. Jesse immediately used the holy word to command the people to attack Center. However, facing the rain of bullets, Center used his body to block them all. Only when someone fired a mortar shot, the powerful destruction caused Center to temporarily disappear on the spot. But even so, his defenses were still not broken. Only then did Jesse realize that the situation had become extremely serious. Center angrily pulled out his weapon and pointed it straight at the crowd. Seeing this, Jesse quickly ordered the people to retreat, but it was too late. Center had already entered hunting mode. As a result, all the innocent passersby were killed by him, while Jesse's group of 3 escaped unharmed once again. After the group escaped the dangerous situation, they immediately went to a gas station. At this time, Jesse felt extremely curious, because he thought that no matter where they escaped, Center would always find their exact location. According to him, if they could not escape that pursuit, then in the end, they would all definitely face death. As soon as he noticed that anxiety, Casty immediately thought of someone. He believed that at this time, perhaps only the 2 foolish angel brothers could help them. However, he was completely unaware that Center was the one invited from hell by the 2 angel brothers. Meanwhile, Derblanc had been killed by Center because he talked too much. When he lost his 1,000-year-old best friend, Fior immediately collapsed. In despair, he put a rope around his neck and intended to end it. However, Fiore forgot that he was an angel, so as soon as he died, he immediately revived. Looking at his still warm body, he could only remain silent for a long time. In extreme pain, Fiore went to a bar to drink alone to relieve his sorrow. At this moment, the host suddenly gave Fiore a microphone. After receiving it, he immediately plugged it into the ice bucket next to him. The high-voltage current immediately killed him on the spot. This scene surprised all his friends below the stage. However, just a moment later, Fiore revived and walked out from behind the stage. The audience below all thought this was a magic show, so they applauded enthusiastically. It was this misunderstanding that unintentionally gave Fior a new direction. He began to become the top star there, performing magic tricks of death and resurrection every day. Thanks to this rapid rise in popularity, Jesse's group finally found him. When they met, Jesse and the others asked Fior why Center kept chasing them. At that time, Fiore frankly said that Center was sent by him, and his mission was to destroy Genus and its host. After hearing that, Jesse understood everything. It turned out that Center was always able to find him thanks to the ability to sense Genus's energy fluctuations. Jesse then explained that God was missing, and he needed to use Genus's power to find him. So Jesse Jesse hoped that Fiore could postpone the mission to destroy Genus. However, Fiore did not seem to care at all. He thought that since Derblanc was dead, he had nothing to care about anymore. Moreover, for that uncle god, Fiore had been in heaven for thousands of years, but had never even met him. Faced with such indifference, Jesse still tried to persuade him. He emphasized that as long as Fiore cancelled Center's assassination mission, he would guarantee to return Genus. Only when he heard the 3 words Genus did Fiore regain consciousness a little. Immediately after that, Jesse and his teammates quickly said goodbye to Fior and continued on their journey to find traces of God. Before leaving, Jesse once again used the holy word to lure Center to appear and also to force Fiora to cancel the assassination mission. However, this made Fiora agitated. He did not believe that Jesse could really give up such a great power. Therefore, he deliberately revealed the whereabouts of the 3 people to Center and also ordered him to continue to assassinate them. Just as Center turned to leave, Fiore suddenly made another request. In just a moment, he changed into a gorgeous outfit and stepped onto the stage. The audience below, who had been waiting for a long time, clapped enthusiastically, expecting his special performance. However, Fior did not pay any attention to them, but only nodded forward. Immediately after, Center immediately opened fire. The bullet sent Fiore flying 800 meters away. This time, he finally did not revive like before. It turned out that the last mission Fiore gave Center was to kill himself. The pitiful angel was finally freed. Meanwhile, Center had to kill a living person every day to steal their soul. The souls he sacrificed were hung upside down on the yin tree of hell, never to rest for 1,000 years. The reason was because Center had no soul to begin with. This was also the reason why Jesse's words become law ability was completely useless to him. The 2 holy guns he used were forged from the wings of dead angels. This type of gun not only hit every shot, but also carried the power of absolute death. Even God would definitely die if he was hit by a bullet. However, such a strong person failed many times in Jesse's hands. Immediately after, Center continued to chase. When he appeared, a black boy who was with Jesse's group said sarcastically that Jesse had left a long time ago and told Center to leave quickly. However, he did not expect that he was about to become prey. Just hearing the incessant chattering, Center immediately stepped forward, grabbed the opponent's hand and crushed it into a block. Immediately after that, he coldly pulled out a gun and shot the boy's head to pieces. The terrible penetrating force of the bullet directly penetrated the entire building, coincidentally hitting the room where Jesse was. It turned out that he was still in the room next door. When Jesse saw the bullet with the mark of a dead angel, he immediately realized that Center had come. He understood that once Center smelled the scent, he would definitely follow the trail. But when Center rushed into Jesse's group, he had already fled. The 3 people were lucky to keep their lives, but they were extremely puzzled. They did not understand why Center was still pursuing them, while Fior had already cancelled the pursuit order. Suspicion arose. Jesse immediately called the bar, where Fiore usually stayed. It was then that he discovered that the angel was dead, and the only person who could kill an angel was Center. Realizing the truth, Jesse understood that in the end, they still had to rely on themselves. Otherwise, his group absolutely could not wholeheartedly search for traces of God. In order to find Center's weakness, the group stayed up all night to research in the library. After a while of searching, they finally discovered records related to the holy assassin. Accordingly, in 1861, during the American Civil War, Center had fought for the Union Army. Although he was brave and good at fighting, he was extremely brutal. However, the war had eventually ended. After being discharged from the army, Center had been lucky to meet the love of his life. He had gotten married and lived happily and had a daughter. But fate was ironic. A terrible disease had quietly come to his wife and children. Center had traveled everywhere to find a cure, and had finally found a cure. However, when he had returned home, he had only seen the cold bodies of his wife and daughter. The extreme pain had shattered his soul. From then on, Center had become the only person left without a soul. Anger and hatred made him turn his back on God, turning him into a heartless killing machine. Because people without souls can never go to heaven, God banished him to hell. For more than 100 years, Center has been reincarnated in hell, witnessing his wife and children die of illness over and over again. Those hundreds of thousands of reincarnations accidentally made him stronger. People without souls are not only the nemesis of all angels and demons, but also possess an immortal body. If Jesse wanted to deal with Center, he had to find Center's soul. Jesse then went to a soul pawn shop, hoping to collect Center's soul fragment. At first, the other party did not pay much attention to him, but when Jesse revealed his last name, the shop owner showed respect. It seemed that Jesse's family also had a not-so-ordinary background. The shop owner immediately introduced him to a mysterious group of people. This group used a soul-carrying vehicle, specializing in collecting collecting soul fragments scattered around the world. Normally, Center's soul should also be here. However, when Jesse took out Center's bullet and compared it with the soul fragments they collected, there was absolutely no match. Driven to the brink of death, Jesse had no choice but to cut off a lock of hair and use 1% of his own soul to fuse with the remaining aura on the bullet. Then he took that soul fragment to find Center, who was pursuing him. When confronted, Jesse said that the mission Fior gave him was completely Fior's own doing. God had no idea. Moreover, God had been missing for a long time. Now if Center was willing to fuse this soul fragment, he would have a part of his soul back. Jesse affirmed that he could use Genus to take Center to heaven, where his wife and children were. Hearing the opportunity to reunite with his family, Center immediately swallowed it without any doubt. However, soon after, he discovered that this was not his real soul. However, it was too late. As long as Center had a soul, Genus could control him. Jesse sternly ordered in the holy word. He told Center to kneel, and at the same time ordered him to put down his weapon. It turned out that Jesse had planned to set a trap. He wanted to banish Center to the deepest level of hell so that he could never escape. But Center did not care, because in his body at this time, there was 1% of Jesse's soul. If he was banished to purgatory, Jesse would fall with him. Only then did Jesse realize that he had put himself in danger. He had to steal the soul car from the driver, then use the holy word to lock Center inside. Then Jesse sank both Center's body and the car to the bottom of the lake, intending to leave Center forever in the dark water. Center was extremely angry, but at this time he was completely unable to escape Genus's power. After that, Jesse hid Center's weapon under the bathroom floor tiles. He thought that as long as God returned, everything would end. Meanwhile, in another corner, Julian was going through a harsh cycle of reincarnation. That man had to hold a gun and leave this world once every day. Every time the shotgun exploded, the next second a bullet would be fired straight into his face. However, no matter how hard his head was, Julian did not die, but his face was deformed into a distorted chrysanthemum. This was the 99th time Julian reincarnated in the most painful memory before he died. That year, before his face had been destroyed, Julian had secretly liked a beauty queen in the residential area. As a true womanizer, as soon as the goddess had given the order, Julian had been there immediately, but when he had run excitedly to the goddess's house, he had been surprised to see her sitting at the end of the bed crying. Julian had thought something serious had happened, but she had just broken up with her boyfriend. What had shocked him even more was that her boyfriend's new girlfriend had had a face full of freckles, not as beautiful as hers at all. The goddess had been so traumatized that her mental balance had been seriously impaired, to the point that she had prepared a suicide note. She had intended to entrust everything to Julian to get revenge on her boyfriend. She had even made a long list of the men she had spent the night with. Julian had been stunned when he had seen the dense pages of names. What had made him even angrier was that even the bald old man next door had been on that list. It had turned out that he had been the only one who had been a pure womanizer. The goddess had entrusted Julian to publish the suicide note and then had prepared to take gun and leave this world. Seeing this, Julian had been startled and had hurriedly held her back. Finally, under Julian's persuasion, the goddess had calmed down. Actually, she had had no intention of leaving this world. She had just wanted to tease Julian. Seeing her put down the gun, Julian had completely breathed a sigh of relief. In that case, the suicide note had been no longer necessary, so he had conveniently burned it. The goddess had gradually forgotten all her worries and had happily leaned on Julian's shoulder. He had been overjoyed, thinking that even the bald old man next door had once slept with the goddess, so a person with a lot of hair must not have been bad. Thinking of this, Julian had immediately kissed her on the lips, but the goddess had been stunned. In her mind, the thought of a toad daring to dream of eating swan meat had flashed through her mind. Feeling humiliated, she had wordlessly grabbed the shotgun next to her and had pulled the trigger, blowing her head to pieces. Julian had been extremely panicked. The gunshot had immediately attracted the goddess's mother outside the door. While trying to calm her down, Julian had tried to open the window to escape, but the damn door had been jammed. Meanwhile, the knocking on the door had become more and more urgent. The suicide note, the only evidence that the goddess had left this world, had been burned by Julian, leaving him unable to clear his name. Knowing that no matter how hard he had tried to explain, he couldn't have saved the situation, he had picked up the gun on the floor and had pointed it at himself. But Julian hadn't died. Instead, his face had turned into a chrysanthemum. From then on, not only had he been ugly, but the blame for the goddess being shot and becoming a vegetative person had also been put on him. Julian had become a sinner and had been cursed everywhere he went. With great difficulty, he had finally received forgiveness, but Jesse had used Genus to send him to hell. Those tragedies forced Julian to reincarnate and repeat the tragedy every day. On the 100th reincarnation, all images images suddenly disappeared. He woke up and found himself floating in a prison cell in midair. This was hell. At that moment, the door creaked open, and a prison guard walked in. He said that the reincarnation device was broken and needed to be repaired, so Julian's reincarnation had temporarily ended. After saying that, he turned and left without looking back. The first time he went to hell, Julian waited anxiously, but when no one came, he boldly pushed the door and walked out. Outside was a deep, bottomless corridor, with rooms on both sides that were exactly like his prison cell. Julian let out a scream that echoed into the void. Unexpectedly, the scream startled the people in the room behind. The door opened, and out came the head of the Nazi Germany, Hitler. The noise continued to cause the doors of other rooms to open one after another. A group of people rushed out, and the originally quiet hallway immediately became bustling. Among them was a young man who, upon seeing Julian's strange appearance, stepped forward to mock him. Fortunately, Hitler behind him stood up to defend Julian. The large gathering quickly attracted the attention of the prison guard. Immediately after, shrill alarm bell rang throughout the hallway. Everyone heard the bell and returned to their cells one by one. Julian also intended to return, but he discovered that the door was locked. Hitler saw him and invited him to his room temporarily. Reluctantly, Julian had to follow. Then, he accidentally witnessed the most painful memory in Hitler's legendary life. The two of them spent some time together and became close. However, Julian still had doubts in his heart. He was Hitler. Did he really want to be friends with him? Not long after, because Julian's cell was still being repaired, he was taken to the warden chief's office. This woman said that before the room was repaired, Julian would be temporarily imprisoned in a multi-person room. Then she played the video of his reincarnation in hell. The warden chief praised Julian as a gentle and considerate boy. However, she also emphasized that this was hell, a place where all the dirtiest things converged. Any kind of good behavior was absolutely unforgivable. If she found out that Julian did good deeds, he would definitely face the most severe punishment. Julian was then put in a group prison. Unexpectedly, Hitler's reincarnation device was also broken, so he was also temporarily locked up with him. While the two were talking, the boy who had mocked Julian came up to cause trouble. He mocked Julian and even tried to hit him. Hitler once again stood up to protect him. However, the boy could not bear it anymore. He thought that no matter how famous Hitler was, everyone was the same after death. He then threw a punch and knocked Hitler down. Seeing this, the people around also stepped forward to take turns punching and kicking Hitler. Julian could not bear the sight and shouted loudly to stop them. However, he immediately remembered the warden chief's warning. Kindness was unacceptable here. So instead of helping, Julian pretended to join the ranks of the beaters. The entire scene was watched by the warden chief. In the American hell, there was an unwritten rule. Doing good deeds was absolutely forbidden. There was even a person who was punished most severely, being thrown straight to the 18th level of hell, just for helping the warden pick up a pen cap that had fallen on the ground. Immediately after, the warden chief announced that the reason why a series of reincarnation devices were broken was because among the people here, there was a person who did not belong to hell. This person had not yet reached the end of his life, and his appearance had caused chaos. The warden chief said that if that person would voluntarily come forward, she could send him back to the mortal world. Julian was immediately moved and almost raised his hand when he heard this. But in the end, he gave up because he knew that in hell, trusting others was the most foolish thing. That small action was accidentally seen by Hitler behind him. Immediately after, a girl wearing glasses in the room stood up and said that she did not belong in hell. When the others heard this, they immediately raised their hands. Because everyone wanted to return to the mortal world, the warden chief looked at them with contempt, completely ignoring them. Before leaving, she only left a vicious sentence that the intruder had better be careful not to fall into her hands. After the warden chief left, Hitler immediately went to Julian. He predicted that Julian was the one who accidentally stepped into the devil's door. This cunning man, after trying to set a trap a few times, became even more certain that Julian did not belong to hell. Hitler told Julian that he should absolutely not believe the warden chief's words. According to him, that woman would never let anyone leave this place, but would only throw Julian into an even more terrible place. To prove his words, Hitler deliberately tripped a passing ghost. Julian, who was a kind young man, instinctively stepped forward to help the girl up. However, this action was just recorded by the camera on the wall. Immediately, the warden chief ordered Julian to be taken to the office. A large hole appeared in front of him. Before Julian could resist, they threw him straight down. He thought he would have to face a scene of mountains of knives, seas of fire, or a pan of boiling oil. However, what awaited him was a holographic projector that could change reality. Very quickly, Julian once again returned to the day his girlfriend left this world. But this time, after he kissed the goddess, she no longer shot herself in the head because of humiliation. Instead, she hugged Julian tightly and said that she really liked him. Julian was completely stunned. In his heart, wondered, this was not hell, it was clearly heaven. Suddenly, there was a noise from the bathroom. The goddess said that although she liked Julian, he was only second in her heart. The person she loved the most was still in the bathroom. Immediately after, the door opened and Jesse walked out. The two openly displayed their affection in front of Julian. Seeing his friends steal his goddess, Julian became angry and immediately grabbed the gun. He wanted to pull the trigger and shoot them both dead. Jesse not only did not dodge but also deliberately provoked him, wanting Julian to go astray on his own. Fortunately, Julian still could not bear to do it in the end. However, he was drawn into that cycle of reincarnation again and again until his mind almost collapsed. It was unclear how much time had passed, but Julian was finally released back to his cell. All of this was a plot set up by Hitler to incite Julian to find a way to escape from hell. Faced with that plan, Julian's heart began to waver. It was true, as the warden chief had said, that he did not belong here. So why couldn't Julian return to the world he originally belonged to? Sure enough, after a night of conflicting thoughts, Julian took the initiative to seek out Hitler the next day, saying that he agreed to escape hell with Hitler. However, both of them understood that, relying on just the strength of the two of them, they could not escape this heavily guarded prison. Therefore, they needed the help of other inmates to attract the warden's attention. Faced with Hitler's request, the inmates completely ignored him. On the contrary, they mocked and ridiculed him. In that situation, Hitler was forced to shout the familiar slogan he used when he was the head of the Nazi Germany. Thanks to his strong influence, he quickly made people start to cause trouble in the cell. When he heard the chaos, the prison guard immediately stepped in to check. Taking advantage of that moment, Hitler hid in the corner of the wall and immediately took the opportunity to escape. Then Hitler kept his promise and went to Julian. However, he also emphasized that he was not kind, because if he lost Julian, he would never be able to return. According to Hitler, the exit from hell is actually in the reincarnation space. Having been in hell for many years, he soon discovered the rule here. As long as Julian could discover his obsession, he would find a way out. As soon as Hitler finished speaking, a ray of light flashed, and the two were pulled back into Julian's cycle of reincarnation. At this time, the goddess was still leaning gently on his shoulder. However, Julian could not help but kiss her. The consequences were predictable, because no one knew how many times the goddess had died and come back to life. Finally, Hitler found the key. He told Julian that he absolutely could not kiss the goddess, but ironically, the goddess then took the initiative to give Julian a kiss. Fortunately, Julian understood clearly what he really wanted, so he resolutely refused the goddess. The goddess considered it an insult. She turned around, grabbed the gun, and shot herself. This was the obsession that Julian carried with him. He always felt guilty about the goddess's death. As long as he could release this burden, he and Hitler would be able to escape hell. After countless cycles of reincarnation, Julian finally realized that the goddess's death had nothing to do with him. He understood that no matter what he did, the goddess would choose to leave this world on her own. If it was her decision, then he could not bear the responsibility. Although the goddess still ended her life right before Julian's eyes, the obsession in his heart had been erased. However, the emergency exit door in front of him was still the same as before, completely not opening. At that moment, a loud knocking sound rang out. Julian's father walked in and scolded his son for killing someone and then trying to escape. Faced with the accusation, Julian immediately loudly refuted. He finally dared to speak out the grievances that he had silently endured for so long. The father, who was already hot-tempered, fell silent upon hearing those words. Immediately, the window in front of Julian suddenly opened. He and Hitler immediately jumped out the window to escape. Soon they arrived at the ferry on the riverbank that transported souls. At this time, Julian only needed to clearly tell the ferryman that he did not belong to hell. Then he could board the boat and leave. The result was so surprising. Julian had not even opened his mouth when the ferryman already knew the whole story. When he waved his hand, a boat broke through the fog and docked at the shore. But at the crucial moment, the warden chief chased after him. She wanted to take Julian back. The ferryman immediately asserted that Julian did not belong here and emphasized that this was his territory, and everyone here had to obey him. Everyone thought that the story ended there, but the warden chief directly killed the ferryman. She declared that God had disappeared, so no one would obey his orders anymore. When she was about to order Julian back, at the crucial moment, Hitler suddenly struck her from behind with a stick, knocking her down. Thanks to that, Hitler and Julian immediately boarded the boat to escape hell. They then continued to board the bus of the underworld and smoothly returned to the human world. Ever since God escaped from heaven and secretly came to the human world, he has been hiding in New Auckland to avoid detection. He even humbled himself to pretend to be a mascot in a bar, allowing passers-by to take photos together. The reason God left everyone alone to hide was simply because he was afraid of Genus's power. He hid himself so well that no one could find his whereabouts. However, God's absence caused heaven to face a series of serious problems. God was missing. Genus escaped. To hide this truth, heaven held a selection that mobilized thousands of actors on Earth. The competition ended when an old man with a face very similar to God passed the test. That person was immediately taken to heaven, but because he was too mentally weak, Jesse exposed him right in front of the believers. The person behind this whole plan was an organization called the Holy Grail. Since Jesse had foiled their plot, Boss Star took the initiative to meet him. Star said that the Holy Grail organization had exclusive control over the divine authorities of 113 countries around the world, and that even heaven and hell had to rely on them to act on Earth. He knew that Jesse was looking for God and declared that his organization was willing to provide unconditional support. Jesse thought that if the Holy Grail was really that powerful, they would definitely know the whereabouts of God, so he did not hesitate to pick up his tools and hit Star a few times, then directly asked him using the holy words. As a result, Star admitted that he really did not know. He only said that God had escaped on his own, and that he did not trust the Holy Grail organization, so now no one knew where God was. Surprisingly, after witnessing Genus's power, Star was not angry at being beaten, but on the contrary, he seemed extremely satisfied. He claimed that the Holy Grail was willing to provide Jesse with all the resources he needed to find God. Jesse also understood that he could not fight alone, so he accepted the offer of cooperation. The two of them went to the headquarters of the Holy Grail. There, the Pope and the Archbishop were already waiting obediently. Jesse wanted to know what God was planning, but the Archbishop explained to him that the angel Cherubel had once challenged God's authority and rebelled, forcing God to flee from heaven. He lied very smoothly without revealing any flaws. However, the Pope sitting next to him could not bear it. He refuted that God had simply disappeared mysteriously. There was absolutely no way the angel Cherubel could have rebelled. He also emphasized that God's whereabouts were actually not unknown. But before the Pope could finish speaking, Star immediately interrupted and signaled to chase the guest away, clearly not wanting Jesse to get any more information. After the two left, Jesse bluntly used the holy words to interrogate Star. At this time, because of Genus's control, Star was forced to reveal the truth. The person the Pope mentioned was the descendant of God. It turned out that 2,000 years ago, God had combined with a mortal woman and gave birth to a son. In order to protect this sacred bloodline, the Pope at that time established the Holy Grail organization. After thousands of years under the protection of the organization, the bloodline of the god has been maintained until today. Jesse immediately expressed his desire to meet this holy son, to directly ask about the whereabouts of God. Faced with Genus's threat, Star absolutely could not refuse. However, to ensure the safety of the descendants, he required Jesse to cover his head throughout the journey. It was unclear how much time had passed when they finally arrived. Before meeting, Star also reminded Jesse that he should not hold too much hope. Sure enough, when he saw the Holy Son, Jesse immediately knelt down. However, what greeted him was not the words of the Bible, but a stream of water that reeked of ammonia. Jesse was stunned. The Holy Son Messiah he had been hoping for turned out to be a fool. The truth was revealed. In order to keep the bloodline of God pure, the Holy Grail organization had practiced incestuous marriage for generations. As a result, by the 25th generation, the descendants of God had become mentally retarded, no longer able to inherit the spirit of their ancestors. Jesse felt that he had worked hard to find the Son of God, but in the end, not only did he not learn any more news, but he also suffered an incomprehensible humiliation. In a fit of anger, Jesse used the holy words to force Messiah to reveal the whereabouts of God. Unexpectedly, this action caused his spirit to completely collapse, falling into a state of panic. Hope seemed to have been shattered. However, upon closer observation, Jesse suddenly noticed a sketch left by Messiah. From then on, he seemed to have grasped the main point. When Jesse returned to the bar, the mascot had disappeared. Only the Dalmatian suit was left on the rack. Right next to it, a holy light was slowly spreading. Jesse, after a fruitless trip, returned to find Star. At this time, Star was the first to complain. He said that if given the choice, no one would want to serve a fool. The Holy Grail organization had worked hard for 2,000 years, yet because of a small incident, God had abandoned everything and had run away. This made Star extremely angry. However, when Star realized Jesse's special ability, his attitude changed. He believed that if God had abandoned the world, then there was no point in searching for him. In his opinion, the one worthy of sitting on the throne of heaven was Jesse. On the contrary, Jesse felt that this view was blasphemy. However, Star was clearly a fanatic. He even ordered the Pope to personally hold a press conference, announcing to all believers that God had disappeared, and at the same time, announced that he would choose a day way to support the Messiah to succeed his throne. The saint Star was referring to was not the foolish fool from before, but actually Jesse. No one expected that this whole incident had caught the eye of God. He once again felt betrayed by humanity. Meanwhile, Tulip accidentally discovered the weapon that Jesse had hidden under the floor tiles in the bathroom. When Tulip realized that it was Center's weapon, she immediately understood that Jesse had lied to her. She remembered that Jesse had said that Center had been sent to hell by her, but the truth was completely different. So the two had a fierce argument. In order to prevent Center from returning, Tulip decided to take the gun to a metallurgical factory, intending to use extremely high temperatures to destroy it. However, even after being tempered at over 4,000 degrees, the gun remained completely intact. Not even the body of the gun had changed. Because these were originally the wings of the god of death and were forged into shape by hellfire, how could they be easily destroyed? At the same time, since God escaped from heaven, the rules that God had established since the beginning gradually collapsed after his disappearance, to the point that even pigs flew up to the sky against nature. Foolish humans considered it a miracle and tried to propagate it everywhere. In the face of such chaos, the Holy Grail organization stood up to suppress the belief in God, and at the same time, supported Jesse to become a new god. They then directly ordered the massacre of an entire village to consolidate their authority. After meeting the Son of God who was imprisoned by the Holy Grail organization, Jesse decided to give up on continuing to cooperate with them. However, the Holy Grail had no intention of letting him go. The organization had people disguise themselves as neighbors living in the house next door, in reality to secretly monitor Jesse and Tulip. At the same time, in order to continue to lure Jesse to become a god, the Holy Grail also secretly released Center, who had been submerged by Jesse at the bottom of the lake a few months ago. This organization promised Center that as long as he captured Jesse, he would be freed, and would also help separate 1% of Jesse's soul from his body. Faced with the opportunity to escape from prison, Center was forced to agree to cooperate, because even without the Holy Grail, he was willing to find Jesse. Meanwhile, Jesse still did not realize that he had accidentally committed a stupid mistake. When Center came to seek revenge, this person directly encountered Tulip. Fortunately, Center's only target was Jesse, so he did not care too much about Tulip. However, Tulip, out of love for her man, took the initiative to attack first. Unfortunately, she was counterattacked by Center and sent flying with just one strike. The noise immediately alerted Jesse's group. When Jesse appeared and tried to use the holy word to control Center again, he immediately discovered that this ability was completely useless, because Center's soul had long been taken by the Holy Grail organization. Once Genus was no longer effective, Jesse immediately fell into a situation where she was completely unable to resist. Casty heard the sound and rushed to help, but in front of a man known as the strongest in the world, he was just like a toy that could be beaten. Since becoming a soulless person, Center had truly become an obsession, killing gods when he met gods, and ghosts when he met ghosts. But in the end, he was forced to kneel by a commoner like Jesse. That's why Center chose the most cruel punishment in the American West to execute Jesse. When he was about to scalp his opponent, the warden chief of hell suddenly appeared. This woman said that she wanted to take Center back to hell. Of course, Center did not accept. However, the warden chief used Center's wife and children as a threat, declaring that if he did not go, she would directly bring his wife and children down from heaven to replace Center and imprison them in purgatory. At first, Center still appeared indifferent, but when the warden chief revealed that God had disappeared, heaven was in chaos, and no one could control, he felt wary. In the end, to protect his wife and children, Center obediently followed her back to hell. Before leaving, the warden chief told Jesse that she had only helped because she had received a commission from Star. Jesse understood at that time that this was a way for the other side to show goodwill. However, he still couldn't help but admire the terrible influence of the Holy Grail, because it could make all of hell work for him. Because he was holding Genus, Jesse wasn't afraid of the other side playing tricks. When the two met, they immediately cooperated well. However, what Jesse didn't expect was that everything was part of Star's plan. They then quickly boarded a private plane, planning to fly to California to announce Jesse's status as a holy child. However, at this moment, an unexpected message interrupted their conversation. The sender was Casty, who was in danger and sent a distress call. It turned out that ever since Star's subordinates disguised themselves as neighbors to approach Jesse's group, this person had been looking for opportunities to get close to Tulip. At first, Tulip did not notice anything suspicious. However, when she tried to destroy the gun that once belonged to Center, the neighbor accidentally revealed the origin of this weapon, while Tulip had never mentioned to her that this was Center's weapon. From that detail, Tulip began to have doubts. At the same time, because Star had successfully persuaded persuaded Jessie, the neighbor decided to immediately move house and retreat. However, Tulip accidentally discovered a book placed on the cabinet next to her. When she opened it, she immediately realized that it was the instruction manual for the Soul Shuttle. At that moment, she was sure that this woman was an agent sent by the Holy Grail. Not long after, the neighbor came out holding a gun in her hand, clearly showing that her identity had been exposed. In just a moment, Tulip was shot through the body and collapsed, her soul leaving her body on the spot. By the time Jessie received Casty's distress message and hurriedly returned home, Tulip was lying motionless in a pool of blood, completely unconscious. At this time, Jessie still did not know that the culprit behind it was the Holy Grail organization. In order to maintain Tulip's breathing, he quickly used the holy word to force her to continue breathing. However, because 1% of Jessie's soul was taken away by the Holy Grail and sealed in a special container, this caused his soul to be defective. As a result, the holy word was completely ineffective and could not save Tulip. When he saw that Tulip was in danger, Casty immediately came up with the idea of turning her into a vampire to save her life. However, Jessie strongly objected because he clearly remembered that the person Casty had transformed before had changed his personality, became a bloodthirsty monster, and almost caused a disaster. Because of their different opinions, the two of them fought each other. Meanwhile, poor Tulip was still in a dying state. Her soul could leave her body at any moment. Finally, Jessie was forced to come up with another plan. He thought that the only way to revive Tulip was to return to the clan. When Jessie reminded him of Casty's vampire status, he also clearly remembered that only sunlight could kill such an immortal. Even if his body was burned to the point of being on fire, as long as he had one breath left, Casty could still slowly recover by sucking blood. He was neither old nor dead, but the paradox was, his son had white hair, was full of illness, and did not have much time left to live. Faced with that situation, Casty once hesitated about whether to turn his son into a vampire or not. He understood that once humans possessed great power, they could easily go astray and commit crimes. Unable to contain his compassion, Casty turned his son into a vampire. As a result, the old man recovered but let himself go, continuously sucking the blood of many people. No matter how Casty tried to dissuade him, it was useless. In the end, he was forced to find an opportunity to push the old man onto the balcony. Under the harsh sunlight, his son was burned to ashes. This tragic experience deeply haunted Casty, and it was also the reason why when he intended to turn Tulip into a vampire, Jessie risked her life to stop him. In order to revive Tulip, Jessie did not hesitate to travel far to return to his clan. He knew clearly that his grandmother was a shaman who could pull the souls of the dead back from hell. However, when facing her long-lost grandson, the grandmother appeared extremely cold. The reason was because Jessie had betrayed the clan and fled. In a desperate situation, Jessie had no choice but to humble himself and admit his mistake. He sincerely said that as long as the grandmother agreed to bring Tulip's soul back, he would be willing to accept any conditions. The grandmother had been waiting for these words. She immediately took out a handkerchief and placed a knife in front of Jessie. When she saw this, Jessie made a blood oath, promising that he would never leave the clan again. After achieving her goal, the grandmother fulfilled her promise. She began the ritual and tried to revive Tulip. At this time, Tulip's soul had fallen into hell and was experiencing the most painful memory before she died. The grandmother decided that they had to bring her soul back before that memory closed, because once Tulip officially entered hell, it could no longer be saved. In order to summon the spirit, the grandmother said that they had to use the soul oil. Then she told Jessie to go find Chowdy to ask for the oil. Hearing this, Jessie did not say much and immediately went straight to Chowdy's house. Because the two were close, they understood each other upon meeting. However, Chowdy frankly said that the soul oil had run out. However, he still told Jessie who still had the oil. Immediately after that, Jessie and Chowdy drove to the Boyder family's territory. Because Jessie's family and the Boyder family were sworn enemies, it was impossible to have a proper conversation to ask for the oil. In that situation, Chowdy took the initiative to tell Jessie to stand aside so as not to affect his performance. Sure enough, he alone quickly defeated the entire group of people in front of him. Thanks to that, the two of them were able to borrow the soul-reviving oil as they wished. After they returned, the grandmother quickly mixed the magic potion and poured it into Tulip's mouth. Then she added a drop of soul-reviving oil and said that they just had to wait for Tulip's soul to return from hell. Meanwhile, in hell, Tulip was experiencing the most painful memory of her childhood. However, on the table in front of her, a pile of snacks that she loved very much suddenly appeared. Tulip had no idea that this was an intervention from the human world. With the mindset that even if she starved to death, she had to eat her fill, she immediately picked it up and started eating. However, when she took a bite, she bit a battery in her mouth. At that moment, her memory before death was about to end. The death knell rang, and the the surrounding space began to collapse. Tulip was so panicked that she had no idea which direction to go. At that moment, the phone on the table suddenly rang. Tulip reluctantly gritted her teeth and answered the phone. Unexpectedly, it was Jesse on the other end of the line. In order to guide Tulip's soul back to her body, Jesse called her directly. He instructed Tulip to find her way back before the memory space collapsed. Otherwise, she would be completely imprisoned in hell and never have the chance to return. However, Tulip had absolutely no idea how to return. Seeing that there was not much time left, Tulip suddenly remembered the battery she had just bitten. She immediately guessed that there was only one electrical device in this memory space, so the battery was the key to escaping hell. Thinking so, she quickly put the battery into the watch. However, this action accidentally caused the collapse of space to happen faster. At that moment, with a flash of white light, Tulip appeared on the road, leading to Jesse's grandmother's house. Just as Tulip was about to return to her body, a man dressed in a Dalmatian costume suddenly appeared behind her. This strange image immediately attracted Tulip's attention. Driven by curiosity, she hurriedly approached. The Dalmatian man immediately called himself God and told Tulip that he wanted her to help do one thing, which was to make them die. Not long after, under the witness of everyone, Tulip revived vividly. That meant that the previous blood oath had been fulfilled, and Jesse would be imprisoned by grandmother's side forever. However, after Tulip was revived, Jesse no longer wanted to keep his promise. He knew that his grandmother's blood oath was no joke, and to escape it, he had to rely on Genus's power to make his grandmother actively break the oath. So Jesse once again sought out Star, hoping that Star could return to him the 1% of his soul that had been taken away. In return, he pledged that he was willing to become Star's master. Immediately after, Star did bring Jesse's soul. However, when Tulip saw the person who had killed her appear, she immediately lost control. In a fit of rage, Tulip took a gun and intended to destroy them all. Unfortunately, Jesse almost got her soul back, but at the crucial moment, his girlfriend ruined it. When he tried to chase after her to get her soul back, his grandmother sensed his intention. Immediately, she directly cast terrifying witchcraft to prevent him from leaving. To make up for her mistake, Tulip drove to New Auckland alone with the plot to get Jesse's soul back from Star. However, when she arrived, the scene had become desolate. The houses were deserted, and except for the scattered pictures of God, there was no one present. Apparently, the Holy Grail had been on guard, so they fled ahead. When they couldn't find any trace of Star, Tulip was forced to turn around and return the same way. However, on the way, she discovered a man on a motorbike following her closely, so Tulip immediately stopped the car. When she saw the man's face clearly, she immediately recognized him as the man who had called himself God when she was resurrected. Before Tulip could react, God quickly approached her. He said that he had come to thank Tulip for completing the mission. At the same time, he also revealed that Tulip's loss of control and killing of the Holy Grail's people was actually due to his holy word's manipulation. Later, Tulip learned that when she discovered that the Holy Grail intended to betray and wanted to help Jesse become the new god, he was so angry that he personally appeared to give them a taste of punishment. When she heard the truth, Tulip did not care whether the god in front of her was real or not. She immediately cursed him as soon as she met him, the god who had been sitting on the throne for many years. This was the first time he had witnessed someone who dared to disrespect him like that. In a fit of rage, he immediately revealed his true form and declared that he was the beginning and end of all things. He affirmed that he was a god who loved all living beings, but also warned that no one was allowed to test his limits. Facing absolute power, Tulip could only silently endure God's anger. In the end, she was forced to watch helplessly as he left. Tulip then swore that she would find God and defeat him no matter what. After returning home, Tulip told Jesse everything she had experienced. Through everyone's analysis, they concluded that the reason God prevented Jesse from adding her soul was because he was also afraid of Genus's power. God wanted Genus to obediently stay in Jesse's body, but could not let him use it directly. Jesse had never had enough time and energy to research God's true plan before. The most urgent thing now was to quickly escape from grandmother's control. However, relying on their own strength alone, they were completely unable to break the current situation. Therefore, Tulip was forced to take another risk and decided to seek help from the Jesse family's eternal enemy, the Boyder family. Tulip used a fake name to meet the ancestor, who was considered the strongest person in the Boyder family. She also lied that a friend of hers had been made a blood pact by the Jesse family, so she wanted to ask them to help resolve it. However, the black woman who received Tulip had already seen through her identity, and even knew that the person who had been made a blood pact was actually Jesse. When she realized that her identity had been exposed, Tulip immediately stood up and was about to leave. But at that moment, a young boy beside her reached out and grabbed her. The so-called ancestor also revealed his true form, revealing the appearance of a dry corpse. The Boyder family seemed to want to imprison Tulip, but in the end, she was lucky to escape. This incident angered the black woman, who immediately ordered the gathering of forces to pursue her to the door. A great melee broke out from there. During the fight, Casty was unlucky enough to be injured. However, Jesse had told him absolutely not to suck blood to recover, because in the witch world there was an unwritten rule. If a vampire was discovered, they would immediately hang him upside down on a tree and wait for the next day's sunlight to burn him. Casty agreed verbally, but by midnight he could not control himself. He sneaked out to suck the blood of a chicken. Unexpectedly, this action was discovered on the spot. His identity as a vampire was immediately exposed. Regardless of who Casty was friends with, the Boyder family quickly hung him upside down on a tree, preparing to let the next day's sunlight burn him to death. To save Casty's life, Jesse offered to let him participate in the death match. This match had a cruel rule. The winner would receive a reward, while the loser would die, and his soul would immediately appear to be possessed. Casty, thanks to his super strong sword, won the first match. Immediately after, Jesse told Chowdy to find some fresh blood to replenish Casty's blood to help him recover quickly, to prepare for the next round. But while the two were still discussing about sucking the chicken's blood, Jesse suddenly took the opportunity to swing a knife and cut Casty into 8 pieces. The scene switched to a delivery company. It turned out that in order to help Casty escape from the witch family's pursuit, Jesse had divided his body into many pieces and planned to send them by mail. Although Casty was very unwilling to do so, in order to save his life, he had to accept it temporarily. In order to prevent Casty from being able to recover after escaping, Jesse had also carefully prepared 2 bags of blood for him. Jesse originally thought that he had at least solved one headache, but as soon as he left, Casty was unwilling to accept it. He immediately used the 2 bags of blood to regenerate his body and directly escaped from the express delivery company. Meanwhile, every time Center swallowed a person's soul, he hung the victim's body on a tree. Over time, the tree trunk was filled with swaying corpses. His gun was famous for its deadly power. If he was hit by a bullet, the one would definitely lose their life. However, ever since the holy gun forged from an angel's wings was lost, Center had lost his ability to kill with a single shot. In the end, even Hell used his wife and child to threaten him, forcing him to obediently return. This time, the one who wanted to see him was the king of Hell, Satan. They crossed the Sea of Hell and entered Satan's palace. Satan had long wanted to teach Center a lesson, but because he was afraid of the holy gun, he had not dared to act rashly. Now Center was no different from a tiger with its claws broken. Satan used Center's wife and children as a threat, forcing him to bow his head and wear shackles. After that, he ordered the god of death to beat Center for 3 days and 3 nights. But to Center, physical torture was no different than scratching an itch. For 3 days he did not complain once. Seeing this, Satan was both angry and respectful, secretly praising Center as a person of rare courage. Finally, Satan made a condition. As long as Center helped him capture Julian and Hitler, who had escaped from Hell, he would forgive all his disrespect, return the weapons, and even allow Center to return to the mortal world to seek revenge on Jesse. The condition was so attractive that Center had no reason to refuse and immediately accepted. Meanwhile, Jesse tried to escape from his grandmother's grip. Jesse asked Star to come to the door to plead for his release, with the condition of reluctantly agreeing to become Star's master. However, no matter how much gold and silver Star offered to entice the grandmother, she was still unmoved, because from the beginning to the end, the only thing she wanted was souls. It turned out that the grandmother had always relied on sucking other people's souls to prolong her life. With such an unreasonable request, the Holy Grail organization could easily fulfill it, because they owned the Happy Soul ship, a machine that specialized in buying and selling souls. They had stored millions of souls in Japan and could have as many as they wanted. But to ensure safety, the grandmother requested that her people go with her, and Jesse was forced to stay under surveillance. At the same time, a loud noise came from the next room. It turned out that a member of the Holy Grail, the one who killed Tulip in the past, had also followed Star here. The enemy met. The blood in Tulip's eyes boiled. She immediately rushed in, determined to avenge her own death. Just when the two were about to fight to the point of destroying the house, Jesse and everyone finished negotiating and walked in. Star quickly assigned the task of retrieving the soul to the woman. Tulip was not at ease and decided to go to Osaka with Chowdy. But as soon as they left, the grandmother had a nightmare. She saw the group of people returning from Osaka, and she died in their hands. For a witch, dreams are not illusions. In order to avoid Jesse's revenge, the grandmother immediately made a mysterious phone call. Not long after, a man with a red body appeared, and that was the king of Hell, Satan. Grandma explained that she could live up to 300 years because she had made a deal with Satan in exchange for the magic of immortality. Grandma asked Satan to send the Grim Reaper to block the road and capture Tulip and take her to hell. In return, she would hand over Genus in Jesse's body to him. Grandma also said that the knowledge that Jesse possessed Genus was revealed by two talkative women in front of Chowdy. Satan agreed to Grandma's request as soon as he heard about Genus, because Satan had asked the Grim Reaper to do the task. At the same time, Tulip's group, with the help of the Holy Grail, successfully packed a crate of souls. However, when they were about to board the plane to return to town, the Grim Reaper suddenly appeared and blocked Tulip's way, specifically wanting to take her away. Tulip quickly pulled out the fake work card that the Holy Grail had prepared and affirmed to the angel that she was not the person they were looking for. Death God thought she had mistaken Tulip and was about to retreat, but Tulip continued to confess that the woman who had killed her was actually Tulip. As a result, Death had caught the wrong person, and Tulip returned to the car satisfied, killing two birds with one stone. However, when Tulip opened the soul box, she was immediately stunned because the box had been switched by the other woman earlier. In another development, Julian, after escaping from hell, walked tens of thousands of miles back to his hometown. However, before his eyes was a large hole, because the entire town had been leveled in the methane gas explosion years ago. Fortunately, the government supported him, and he was adopted by an orphanage. Julian did not collapse, but patiently waited for someone to come and adopt him. When the camp announced that there was an adopter, Julian raised his head and was stunned to see that the adopter was Center. Julian felt sorry for himself because he had not even had a few days to go out and was about to be taken back to hell. The nurse beside him seemed to realize something and wanted to step forward to stop him, but as a result, he was slapped to death by Center immediately. Next, Center just needed to find Hitler. This leader, since returning to the human world, had found a small shop to work. When faced with Center's sudden arrival, Hitler immediately resisted and affirmed that he could be beaten to death but would not return. However, reality is stronger than humans, and thus, Center successfully captured two prisoners who escaped from hell. He took them to the hell bus station and waited for the underworld bus to pick them up. At the same time, the Grim Reaper also dragged the woman to run over. When they were about to stop the car to return to hell to report, Tulip suddenly appeared. Her purpose this time was to retrieve the box from the woman's hand. However, the Grim Reaper was not interested in a mortal. Tulip immediately used the contract between Satan and the grandmother to threaten him, reminding Grim Reaper not to ruin the good thing between the two. After hearing this, the Grim Reaper immediately chose to give the soul box to Tulip because keeping it was useless. When Tulip saw the substitute was being tied tightly around the neck by the Grim Reaper's whip and unable to speak, she could only stand and watch, unable to reveal her true identity. Tulip had already arranged a favorable situation for herself, but in the end, she still couldn't bear to let the woman go to hell instead. She called out to the god of death and said that she didn't know Tulip at all, and that the other person was just someone she was talking about. However, at this moment, Julian on the bus saw her and immediately waved goodbye. Seeing that her identity had been exposed, Tulip turned around to escape, but the god of death's leather strap had already wrapped tightly around her. Chowdy, who was standing next to her, had no intention of helping when he saw Tulip being captured. On the contrary, he took the box and ran away. Legend has it that before God ascended to heaven, he had an affair with a young woman, thus giving birth to a child, and this was God's only bloodline on earth. The Holy Grail organization had protected and enforced incestuous marriage for 25 generations. Although they had successfully maintained God's bloodline, his descendants had become fools. Now the Holy Grail also wanted him to bear Genus in Jesse's body. However, even the bloodline of God could not withstand this power and was blown up by Genus. Fortunately, the Holy Grail used cloning technology to create hundreds of Messiah children of God, but all the clones exploded one by one and none of them succeeded. On the contrary, Jesse was extremely dizzy by this series of events. It turned out that in order to completely escape from the clutches of the grandmother, Jesse planned to retrieve his soul fragment to replenish his soul, and at the same time use the holy words of Genus. However, since his last miss, his soul fragment had been taken away by the actual authority of the Holy Grail, the Pope. In order to retrieve his soul fragment, Jesse had no choice but to follow Star to the Holy Grail headquarters. As soon as he was proclaimed a holy son, the Pope immediately pointed a gun at him. Apparently, he had been waiting for a long time. Jesse did not spare this cunning old man, immediately grabbed the gun and directly attacked the Pope, but the Pope's subordinates were too numerous. They took the bullets for him. However, Jesse was not incompetent. He defeated a group of weaklings with his bare hands and continued to point his gun at the Pope. It turned out that the whole thing was a meticulous plan by Star in alliance with Jesse to overthrow his boss. However, the Pope was unharmed after being hit by a bullet because the bullet was was blocked by his thick layer of fat. Seeing this, Star had no choice but to raise his gun and point it at Jesse and announce that he had once again captured Jesse. Jesse realized that in times of danger, having a lot of meat can really save lives. He was tied to a device, and they placed a high-pressure device on his body connected to a plastic tube, obviously wanting to force Genus out of his body. However, Jesse did not panic because he knew that if Genus possessed anyone else besides himself, they would explode. When they invited the Son of God out, Jesse still could not keep calm, because this was the bloodline of God. However, Star did not give him time to worry, and immediately pressed the switch. Genus, stimulated by the high voltage, immediately rushed out of Jesse's body and entered the body of the Son of God through the pipe. Unexpectedly, the Son of God was no exception and was blown to pieces by Genus. When Genus lost its host, it immediately returned to Jesse's body. Jesse intended to mock him a few words, but did not expect that after cleaning the room, the other party would bring up another Son of God. Jesse was immediately stunned because these cunning old men had cloned countless sons of God. Just like that, the sons of God came onto the stage one after another, but they all exploded into pieces. Jesse could not count how many times he had entered and exited, but the other party had not succeeded. However, they finally stopped this useless behavior and very quickly invited a doctor. This doctor was not simple. After more than 10 years of research, she discovered that Genus was the product of a fusion between an angel and a demon, so the host had to have a balanced ratio of good and evil to be able to withstand Genus's possession. The doctor used this principle to create a genetic drug that, once injected into the host's body, could adjust the ratio of good and evil to a suitable level. They quickly injected the drug into the next clone. When Genus switched again, this time, it was indeed successful. The man said that everyone should obey him. His words resounded like the holy word of God, causing the people outside to immediately kneel on the ground. All these actions proved Genus's power, and they were obviously successful. However, the next second, the doctor entered the room and a shot killed the clone. If the drug had been successfully researched, then the real Son of God should have appeared. It turned out that the previous clones were just cannon fodder. This time, once successfully entered, the Pope would definitely not hesitate to kill Jesse. Seeing this, Jesse seemed to have accepted his fate, so he offered to pray before the Son of God and accept death. The Pope, thinking that he had a sure win, agreed to Jesse's request. However, Jesse took the opportunity to pretend to fall and directly placed the high-voltage device on the Pope. When Jesse finished praying, the Pope, unaware of it, immediately pressed the remote control, causing a high-intensity electric current to flood his entire body. Jesse took the opportunity to pick up the gun on the ground and quickly dealt with the remaining security personnel in the room. Immediately after, he struggled with the Pope, who had gradually recovered. Faced with a fat man weighing several hundred kilograms, Jesse was completely unable to fight. The Pope also used his weight to press Jesse flat on the table. When Jesse felt like even his feces were about to be squeezed out, the table below could not bear the weight and immediately broke in half. He took the opportunity to aim his gun at the Pope repeatedly, but the bullets could not penetrate his thick layer of fat. In a desperate situation, Jesse once again placed the high-voltage device on himself, intending to transfer Genus from his body to the Pope's body in order to blow up this fat man. With the Pope's plea, Jesse pressed the remote control without hesitation. Genus immediately rushed out of Jesse's body and entered the Pope's body. Immediately after, the Pope's body exploded, and Genus once again returned to Jesse's body. At the same time, Star, who had been chased away by the Pope, also arrived. When he saw the meat scattered everywhere, he immediately recognized the source of this mess. At the same time, Jesse also realized that his soul fragment was in the Pope's corpse fragments, because this guy had hidden Jesse's soul in his body all this time. The two of them fought over the soul fragment, looking extremely disgusting. However, Jesse eventually regained his soul fragment, and his holy words were restored once again. Jesse then came before the Son of God and saw in his eyes the image of the world about to be destroyed. This made Jesse very frightened. At first, he wanted to kill the Son of God to end everything, but in the end, he could not bring himself to do it. Instead, Jesse took the clothes of the clone in place of the real Son of God and let him and all the clones go free. As he watched the doppelgangers rush out into the streets, Jesse realized that the Holy Grail organization would have a hard time finding the original. Everyone knows that Center's gun is a type of divine weapon that, according to the rules, hits every shot and if hit, will definitely kill. However, Tulip discovered that even a high temperature of 4,000 degrees could not destroy the gun, so she conveniently threw the gun on the street. This caused Center's strength to drop sharply, leaving only an immortal body. In order to restore Center's peak strength, Satan gouged out the eyes of the god of death and reforged 2 new holy guns for him. However, after Center received the new weapon, he directly fired a shot that sent Satan to heaven immediately. Unfortunately, the famous king of hell, Satan, was easily killed by his own subordinates. It turned out that Tulip had been captured by the god of death because of her exposed identity before. Just like that, she and Center escorted Julian, Hitler, and Tulip on the hell bus to return to report to Satan. Unfortunately, the three people who escaped from hell had not lived for a few days before they were about to die. The three people were not willing and planned to escape from prison halfway. In theory, if the chain was thrown into the gear shaft, it would get stuck immediately. The car running at high speed would definitely flip over, and they could take the opportunity to escape. A few people agreed that the plan was feasible and threw the iron chain into the gear shaft, but in reality, it had no effect. The Grim Reaper in front even mocked them. Tulip was furious and immediately started provoking Center. When she asked about his wife and children, Center was indeed angry and directly slammed her into the car window. The glass on the car cracked. This was exactly what Tulip was aiming for. At first, everyone wanted to discuss how to escape, but Hitler couldn't wait any longer and directly stepped forward and broke the glass with one kick. However, just as he was about to jump out of the car to escape, the undercarriage suddenly exploded. The entire body of the car was blown away by the huge shockwave, causing everyone in the car to flip over and become dizzy for a moment. Just as the two people from the Center's group were bewildered, they saw a group of soldiers fully equipped with weapons appear. These people were Hitler's former subordinates, his immortal underlings. They held guns and artillery to threaten the Center's group, demanding that they release their leader. However, the Center's group, which was the boss in hell, immediately took action to destroy these little devils. Facing the strongest man on earth and the god of death in hell, the little devils had no power to resist at all. Meanwhile, Hitler on the other side took advantage of the fighting to escape, but unexpectedly at the crucial moment was held back by Julian because he had witnessed Hitler's brainwashing ability. Hitler was afraid that this ghost would continue to cause trouble after being resurrected, and he never expected that the important plan would be ruined by Julian. The two immediately fought fiercely. At the same time, Center's group had also finished off all the enemies. However, the Grim Reaper began to taunt Center, saying that these little devils were just like his daughter and liked to play house. These words must have irritated Center, but before he could get angry, the tank fired a shot that knocked him to the ground. Immediately after, the tank directly ran over Center below. At the same time, Julian and Tulip finally finished fighting and ran out, but the god of death did not let them go. She reached out to grab the two of them. Unexpectedly, the tank's cannon was pointed at them. Just when Tulip thought she was about to die, the time around her suddenly stopped. When she turned around, she found God appeared before her eyes. It turned out that God had suddenly saved them and teleported Tulip to the shore. Tulip did not understand why the noble god came to save her. God explained that he was a benevolent god, loving all believers. Tulip immediately laughed when she heard that, because people's prejudices towards God were like a mountain, and her perception of God had 10 mountains like that. Seeing this, God did not beat around the bush. He saved Tulip in the hope that she could convince Jesse so that he would not stubbornly seek God and would not use Genus anymore. Tulip realized that God was afraid of Genus, but she couldn't deny that Jesse was in danger right now. God quickly ended the silence. At the same time, Center, who was pinned under the tank, discovered that the gas tank was leaking. He took out his dagger and blew on it, causing the dagger to instantly glow red. Center then stabbed the dagger into the gas tank and the tank exploded on the spot. Thanks to that, Center, who was pinned underneath, was freed. However, the first thing he did was find Death God. When seeing Center full of murderous intent and could kill her at any moment, the Grim Reaper had to tell the truth about the death of Center's wife and children. It turned out that Center's wife and children were eaten by crows because of Satan. Knowing the truth, Center immediately decided to return to hell to find Satan to settle the score. Not long after, he brought Julian and Hitler to hell. When he saw that Center had completed his mission, Satan gouged out the eyes of the Grim Reaper, who had failed in his mission to forge a new holy gun for Center, then used his wife and children to threaten him, forcing him to continue serving him. However, at this time, Center already knew the truth. The moment he held the gun, he pointed it at Satan. When he had the weapon, Center could even kill Satan. At first, Satan did not want to admit it, but Center did not listen to his excuses. In order to save his life, Satan had to tell the whole truth, and it turned out that all of this was God's command. Center did not expect that even Satan was just a pawn, but this did not affect his revenge. Satan then passed away miserably. Meanwhile, the old witch, in order to live long, cruelly cut open her daughter's stomach. She took out the full-term fetus and devoured her daughter's soul to prolong her life. Over the years, she had used witchcraft to control countless people, forcing them to find suitable souls for her to devour. Anyone who did not escape was killed by the witch with a cruel blood oath. Her daughter and son-in-law also wanted to escape but were still captured by her subordinates. The son-in-law was shot dead on the spot, and the daughter was even more miserable, having her fetus cut open. In the end, only Jesse survived. Jesse had been controlled by his grandmother since he was young, and he had taken her place in the underground fighting arena to harvest the souls of those who had failed. For many years, Jesse had silently endured until he had his soul replenished at the Holy Grail organization and could use the holy word of Genus again. He had enough power to fight against her. Jesse immediately returned to his grandmother's house. His grandmother's subordinates initially wanted to stop him, but were immediately controlled by Jesse using Genus, causing him to freeze. As he watched Jesse get closer step by step, the man's heart was in turmoil. Now he could not move. He could only beg Jesse to spare him. Although Jesse had no intention of killing the man, Jesse also did not want to forgive him easily. Before leaving, Jesse used holy words to force him to shoot himself in the foot. The gunshot attracted Chowdy's attention, but Jesse did not intend to use holy words to deal with him, as it would be too unfair. The scene switched to the deathmatch arena, where a group of people had arrived. Before the man could declare the start of the deathmatch, Jesse directly took action, showing the deep hatred between the two sides. After several rounds of attacks, Jesse still could not cause any damage to Chowdy. With physical advantage, Chowdy knocked Jesse down. It turned out that Chowdy was the one who had shot Jesse's father that year, and his mother had also been captured by Chowdy. Spurred by anger, Jesse's fighting power skyrocketed. He picked up the chain on the ground and hit Chowdy's head several times in a row, causing Chowdy to be caught off guard and successfully ambushed. After finishing, Jesse used the holy word to order the man to find gasoline, intending to light a fire to burn Chowdy's body and the crime scene. Jesse initially wanted to spare the man, but he understood that if he didn't stay, his grandmother would be in danger, and he himself wouldn't be freed. He realized that his sins were piling up, so he decided to stay and atone for them. Although these people weren't completely innocent, they were still really pitiful. Jesse had nothing more to say when he saw this, and finally used a cigarette butt to purify them all. Jesse then entered the grandmother's room. Without saying a word, he directly used the holy word to order his grandmother to burn his blood contract. Although this was the first time his grandmother had come into contact with the great power of Genus, she realized that she was no match for Jesse. Therefore, she agreed to let him leave the family and promised that she would never bother him again. However, Jesse's family tragedy was all caused by this old witch, and Jesse still believed that killing her was enough to relieve the hatred in his heart. Surprisingly, Grandma didn't panic. She had already predicted that she would be dealt with by Jesse, so she had contacted the king of hell, Satan, beforehand to make a new deal. Grandma had cursed that if Jesse killed her, his soul would fall into hell after Jesse died. As a missionary, Jesse definitely couldn't accept that. When Jesse realized this, he didn't kill Grandma in the end. Instead, he used the holy word to control Grandma, forcing her to throw all the soul boxes that Chowdy had brought back into the fireplace to burn. Grandma was heartbroken to see the souls that she had longed for being destroyed, but she was completely unable to stop because of the holy word's compulsion. Jesse left in anger, still unwilling to let this old witch escape punishment. Finally, Jesse returned once more and decided that, even if he had to go to hell, he would make this old witch die. He tied Grandma to the soul-sucking device. He inserted the syringe and without hesitation, pressed the bet switch. Along with the grandmother's cries, she was finally drained of her soul by her own machine until she died. However, what everyone did not know was that the king of hell was killed by Center. Hell had thus changed hands. Tulip then drove in front of Jesse. She informed that since she and God broke up, she had heard that Casty had been taken away by the Holy Grail organization. Tulip and Jesse immediately decided to go rescue Casty. Casty was currently being held by Star in the Holy Grail organization's base. There was also a winged angel above his head, and this person was Genus's father. Jesse immediately realized that all of this was Star's plan. Star had prepared two options from the beginning. The reason was that if Jesse turned around and stopped cooperating after receiving his soul, Casty would be Star's last card. That angel had been hung in a well for 100 years. The group that captured him were mortals, and, for many years, he had not drunk a drop of water, but he did not die and could not escape. Casty's arrival here had made that angel less lonely. Casty saw the angel's true form for the first time, but before he could say a word, he was dragged away by the Holy Grail people. They took advantage of Casty's super strong self-healing ability and directly used him as a model for students to conduct all kinds of living experiments. Just like that, Casty had to endure inhumane torture every day, not even given any anesthesia during the whole process. At the same time, Jesse and Tulip Tulip found a holy grail base. Jesse used the holy word to directly control a group of soldiers, forcing them to accept Tulip as their master. The two then planned to have this group of soldiers infiltrate the holy grail base that Star had built on the mountainside. The two split up. Jesse went straight to the outside of the holy grail headquarters first. When Star saw that Jesse was alone, he ordered Jesse to go in and took Jesse to a room. To prevent Jesse from using the holy word to control him, Star wore soundproof headphones. As long as he couldn't hear the holy word, it wouldn't work. To be safe, he also found a deaf mute who could read lips to act as an interpreter. Jesse got straight to the point and hoped they would release Casty, but Star's patience was running out. Seeing that Jesse's attitude was sweet when needed and cold when finished, Star decided to show him. Seeing that talking wouldn't work, Jesse took off a soldier's headphones and used the holy word to tell him to launch a counterattack. Jesse found this funny, because if Genus was so easily subdued, then God wouldn't have had to flee from heaven. Jesse continued to use the holy word to control the guard at the door, forcing him to lead him to find Casty, who was being held captive. Not long after, Jesse was led by the guard to where Casty was. When Jesse saw his brother being tortured beyond human form, Jesse was extremely angry. At the same time, the person who had tortured Casty earlier also brought a group of people. To avenge Casty, Jesse decided not to use Genus, but instead picked up a scalpel beside him, knocking these people down, one by one with precise slashes. The enemy had a large number of people, but in Jesse's eyes, they were just chickens. When Casty saw the person who had tortured him being killed by Jesse, he also felt somewhat comforted. Not long after, Jesse single-handedly defeated a group of people. On the other side, Tulip led the soldiers she had controlled to the main gate. She had originally intended to blend in to support Jesse. The side effect of Genus appeared again. The foolish leader declared that Tulip was his master. Seeing this, the enemy immediately closed the gate and the surrounding fortresses began to fire at them. Tulip, while withstanding the heavy fire, ordered the person to stop the gate from closing. However, when she turned around and returned, she discovered that the person had used his body to block the gate, and as a result, he was immediately crushed. Tulip reluctantly climbed up the steep cliff around, but she did not expect that her sworn enemy had been waiting for her for a long time. This time, both sides pulled out their guns very promptly, and the two bullets even collided with each other. When the two women met in this situation, they immediately fought fiercely. Each punch was extremely powerful. After a few rounds, Tulip was unfortunately thrown off the fortress by her opponent. However, fortunately, the woman's chair got stuck on the cliff during the fight. Tulip used the momentum to flip herself up, then took the opportunity to push her opponent down. Originally thought she would fall to her death, but unexpectedly, her suit suddenly opened up into a parachute. Luckily, Tulip escaped her and found the door switch. At the same time, Jesse and Casty also rushed to the door. When Jesse saw the main door open, he immediately ran out. However, at the crucial moment, Casty stopped. Jesse thought he was afraid of the sunlight and intended to give his coat to Casty to cover, but his pride arose, because every time Casty was in trouble, Jesse saved him. This time Casty wanted to use his own strength to escape the fortress. Even though he had witnessed the deaths of many people, he was still determined not to leave. Jesse had no choice but to take Tulip and leave first. However, that night, Jesse was awakened by a loud explosion. When he sat up and looked out the window, he was horrified to find a nuclear bomb exploding in the distance. At the same time, a phone call suddenly came in. When Jesse picked up the phone, he realized that the person on the other end of the line was his father, who had passed away many years ago. His father said that there was not much time left. Jesse had to stop the apocalypse and should go find God. At the same time, a nuclear explosion in the distance approached Jesse's house, accompanied by a flash of light. Jesse woke up in bed with a start. Looking at Tulip sleeping soundly beside him, he realized that it was just a dream. When he looked out the window, there was no trace of the explosion, and Jesse was relieved to continue sleeping. But suddenly, Star appeared from somewhere and rushed forward to strangle Jesse. The two immediately rushed into a fight. Jesse pressed Star down on the bed with just a few blows. When Jesse used his strength to strangle Star, Star's face in front of him suddenly turned into Tulip's. Jesse was scared and immediately wanted to stop, but his hand completely disobeyed his will and still tightly gripped Tulip's neck. Seeing his girlfriend about to die in his arms, Jesse was forced to use the holy word to force himself to let go. This series of consecutive dreams made Jesse extremely uneasy. He realized that the things that happened in his dreams would most likely come true in the future, and the only one who could solve this problem was God. So he disregarded God's previous prohibition and was determined to find God to ask for clarification. However, the road ahead was full of danger, so Jesse hid Tulip and left alone. On the way, Jesse saw an old man riding a camel from afar. He intended to hitch a ride, but before he could go a few steps, he met another person also also riding a camel. The two people had different beliefs, and as soon as they met, they cursed each other's family tree. The more they cursed, the more they seemed to have no intention of going any further. They even pulled out their weapons as if they wanted to kill each other. Seeing this, Jesse had no choice but to use the holy word to stop the two and force them to be good friends. After that, both of them died in a daze. Before he died, the old man told Jesse that the other person did not understand English at all. Because he did not understand, Jesse's holy words were also ineffective, leaving him helpless and only able to continue walking. Not knowing how long they had been walking, Jesse finally arrived at the nearest airport and coincidentally met a pilot there. He took out the pendant-shaped rock that he had seen in his dream and asked the pilot about its location. Unexpectedly, the pilot actually knew. He said that the rock was located in Australia and was a famous holy place there. Jesse and the pilot boarded the plane to Australia. However, strangely, Jesse was alone on the plane. While his hands were still bleeding, it seemed that he had hijacked a plane. On the way, Jesse struggled to find God, but unexpectedly, God came to the fortress of the Holy Grail. God seemed to sense Jesse's direction. Before he reached his destination, he suddenly encountered a strong air current. The plane lost control and plummeted into the sea. But thanks to the lifeboat as a cushion, Jesse miraculously survived. But the pilot was not so lucky. Jesse realized that all these events were arranged by God to prevent Jesse from finding him. Even God, he could not easily kill Casty. When he turned around, he found himself on the beach in Australia. Before that, to escape the handcuffs, Casty had directly stripped off all the flesh from his wrists. He then quickly climbed up to the mouth of the well, hugged the angel, and bit the angel to death. However, as soon as he landed, Casty witnessed a flash of holy light behind the door. The angel from earlier reappeared unharmed. Since the angel had the ability to regenerate infinitely, Casty bit him to death just to help the angel escape. Immediately after, the angel hugged Casty tightly and flew out of the well. This was clearly a plan that the two had discussed beforehand. After escaping, Casty immediately looked for Tulip. While the two were rejoicing, the bar owner suddenly showed them the news, revealing that Jesse was wanted in Australia. The two immediately prepared to go rescue him. While Tulip was packing, the angel who had escaped with Casty reappeared. Immediately after, the angel sensed a familiar aura. When Casty turned around, he found a demon standing behind him. This was clearly the angel's wife. The two had been separated for many years, and upon meeting, they couldn't help but dance. After a dance, they revealed their true forms and hugged each other tightly. It was only after a long while that they finally let go. Just as Casty was about to congratulate them on their reunion, the angel pulled out a holy sword from behind his back, and before Casty's bewildered expression, the angel stabbed the demon through. Casty could hardly believe his eyes. The angel had just said he loved her, but the next second he had killed her. However, immediately after, a white light appeared, and the demon once again appeared before the two. It turned out that not only angels had the ability to regenerate infinitely, but so did demons. The two immortals immediately rushed to fight. After each resurrection, the ground was quickly filled with corpses. At this time, Casty no longer had the mind to pay attention to the fighting couple. He just wanted to quickly go to Australia to rescue Jesse. Jesse was now facing the biggest crisis of his life. It turned out that Center, after searching everywhere on the ground, felt Genus's vibration on the other side of the earth. Immediately, Center blew into his pistol. The gun instantly turned red. Then he pulled the trigger. Towards the ground, Center's target was the sky on the other side of the earth. With the rule of every shot hits its mark, the bullet pierced through the center of the earth and flew out the other side. A young man standing nearby died on the spot. When he was about to go closer to take a look, Center shot him to the sky without saying a word. Even though it was a whole circle around the earth, the accuracy was still perfect. Very soon after, Center and Julian went through the tunnel to Australia. Meanwhile, Jesse was still at a car rental company preparing to rent a car, completely unaware of the danger that was silently approaching. The staff wanted to complete the procedures for him, but when they discovered that the other party was a wanted criminal who had hijacked the plane, they were immediately scared and did not know what to do. Jesse realized the situation, so in order to avoid unnecessary trouble, he immediately used Holy Word to make the staff forget that they had met him. However, this action made Center feel Genus's energy fluctuations. Just as Jesse was about to drive away, a truck suddenly blocked the road. When he turned around, he was horrified to find Julian, who he had previously sent to hell, signaling him with his eyes to run. Jesse looked but did not understand. The next second, Center appeared. Jesse immediately stepped on the gas to fly away, and Center, who was about to shoot, lost sight of Jesse. On the other side, after escaping death, Jesse began to worry about Julian. After all, he had escaped hell with great difficulty. After much deliberation, Jesse decided to go save him. He went to a construction site first and used the holy word to control everyone there. This action immediately made Center Center feel Genus's energy fluctuations. However, when Center appeared, what greeted him was a giant rock. The impact was so great that Center disappeared into the dust. Jesse took the opportunity to quickly take Julian away from the construction site. On the way, they hijacked a police car. As a result, Julian, who was an honest person, conveniently took the police's gun. In the car, Jesse apologized to Julian for sending him to hell, but his words were completely gentle, not showing the cruelty Julian had to go through. At this time, Julian was no longer the timid boy he used to be. He held a gun and pointed it at Jesse, intending to teach him a lesson. Jesse could not believe that the person who was once the most vulnerable would dare to shoot at him. At the same time, Center caught up. The situation became extremely dangerous, but Center did not kill Jesse. Instead, he pulled the bullet out of Jesse's shoulder and explained that the reason he was looking for Jesse was to join forces to kill God. Jesse was shocked by Center's crazy thinking, but Center said that his gun could kill Satan, so it could probably kill God too. Even though Jesse was a missionary for God and didn't want to cooperate, Center still insisted on taking him along. This was the closest Jesse had come to death. Casty wanted to catch him, but as a vampire, just a little sunlight would burn him up. Jesse knew he would definitely die, so he wanted Casty to let go. Since God had just used a nuclear bomb to kill him, and the shockwave from the explosion was about to disintegrate the plane, Jesse had no choice but to use the holy word to force Casty to let go. He fell straight from a height of tens of thousands of meters to the ground and rolled over to his death. Although he could use the power to say anything, falling from this height was enough to completely kill him. It turned out that when they learned that Jesse was wanted in Australia, Casty and Tulip immediately pretended to be American police officers and went to the local police station to ask for information. They claimed to be messengers from the central government to escort the criminal Jesse back to the US. With their arrogant demeanor and domineering aura, they stunned the police chief. However, the police chief announced that Jesse was dead and the culprit was right in the station. The two immediately went to see, but they did not expect that the culprit mentioned was Julian, who was so gentle that even ants did not dare to kill him, but now he dared to attack Jesse. Tulip could not believe it at all. Julian only admitted that he injured Jesse, but he did not know if Jesse was killed after Center took him away. The two had to rely on the clues provided by the police to follow the trail to a farm. When they arrived, they discovered that the entire family of 3 had been brutally murdered. Tulip recognized this method as Center's familiar hanging method and saw that the corpses were still warm, so he immediately affirmed that the victims had not gone far. In fact, this was true because Jesse did not want to cooperate after knowing that Center intended to kill God, and Center committed the crime at this house to force him to submit. When Tulip walked out of the room, she saw no remarkable traces. However, a trailer in the distance caught her attention. Driven by curiosity, Tulip approached and discovered that inside was the Dalmatian suit that God had worn. There were also many models on the table, not only Jesse's church, but also a model of Jessie herself. Besides, a photo of a rock was also present on the table. Tulip immediately realized that this was God's residence. Each model on the table described Jesse's current path in detail, proving that all his movements were being monitored by God. Seeing this, Tulip immediately decided to chase Jesse. She did not know that God was secretly observing from a corner, and Tulip's appearance was also part of his plan. In order to quickly catch up with Jesse, the two decided to steal a plane. At the same time, the representative of Hell Hitler and the representative of Heaven Jesus appeared at the Holy Grail headquarters. Now the king of Hell, Satan, has been killed by Center, and God has also escaped from heaven and disappeared. Hitler took this opportunity to seize power in Hell, and Jesus, the number 2 in heaven, became the highest voice of both sides. They came here under God's summons. It turned out that the Holy Grail had received his mandate and secretly carried out a plan to destroy humanity. As the times changed and most people no longer believed in God, he decided to cultivate a new species to replace them, calling this the Doomsday Plan. First, the world must be destroyed. Hitler and Jesus came to divide the souls after the world was destroyed, and because of fighting they kept arguing. Meanwhile, Star received a phone call from God, with the sole purpose of transporting a nuclear bomb to Australia. On the other side, Tulip and Casty drove a plane to chase ahead. On the way they saw the silhouettes of Jesse and Center in God's trailer. Jesse recognized the plane's shadow on the ground and knew someone was coming to save him. He tried not to show his emotions as he prepared to jump on the plane. Center's vision was blocked by the red smoke and could only watch Jesse escape. Jesse thought that when he got on the plane, he was out of danger. However, when he saw the photo of the rock, he was immediately stunned. When he knew that this photo appeared in God's trailer, Jesse realized that everything from the time he dreamed of the rock until he went to Australia to search for it, they were all in a trap set by God. But But they were already in the blast zone. God had been waiting for a long time. The plane was affected by the shockwave and became out of control. Jesse was thrown out of the plane. Luckily, Casty managed to grab him. However, the powerful ultraviolet rays caused Casty's arm to start burning, and the plane slowly disintegrated. Jesse realized that only if he sacrificed his life would God stop. So he decided to fall straight down from the sky and die in God's hands. Although Jesse was dead, his soul arrived in a sacred realm similar to heaven. The long-dead angel, Fior, appeared before him and led Jesse through the copper forest, through the cold snow and the endless ocean, finally reaching a golden door. When the door was opened, inside was a sanctuary filled with angels. This sanctuary belonged to God, who was currently missing. At the same time, the demons of hell were preparing to attack heaven. They wanted Jesse, who possessed Genus, to replace God on the throne and become the supreme God of heaven. Faced with this temptation and absolute power, Jesse had to make a difficult choice. Which path would he choose to continue? Even though he was a missionary for God, Jesse couldn't help but be moved by the throne. When his trembling hand touched the throne, he saw an image of himself holding infinite power. But in the end, Jesse still firmly refused. Immediately, everything around him disappeared, replaced by a hologram typical of hell. They not only used a nuclear bomb to kill him, but also banished his soul to hell. Despite the horrific torture, Jesse still did not give up. At the same time, a mysterious person broke into hell and kicked open Jesse's prison door. This person was Center, who was riding a horse to save him. Halfway there, they rested by a fire. Center was curious about how God treated Jesse, wondering if he was still as devout as before. Jesse recognized Center's indignation, as if he was suffering for Jesse. However, he also noticed something unusual. Center usually didn't talk much. He usually just walked. But this time he rode a horse and acted strangely when he came to save Jesse. When Jesse realized that, Center immediately shouted loudly, asking him to quickly ascend to the throne of God. It turned out that everything was still just an illusion. Jesse was still trapped in the virtual space before. Fior appeared and urged him to quickly sit on the throne so that everything would end. However, Jesse still refused. He realized that the current God had flaws and he himself was not qualified to sit on the throne. Seeing that Jesse still refused to cooperate, Fior directly ordered him to sit on the throne. Jesse was revived and crawled out of the hole that Tulip had dug for him. He was still a bit confused about what was real and what was imaginary, so Jesse just wandered forward. At that moment, God appeared in front of Jesse in a trailer. Seeing him, Jesse was so moved that he almost cried. He realized that all the trials he had just passed were God's tests, and the fact that he was not tempted proved that he had passed the test successfully. Filled with joy, Jesse understood that God would not need to destroy the world to start over. God smiled kindly and hugged Jesse, saying that he had almost passed the test. However, the next words stunned Jesse. Just thinking about sitting on the throne was a sin. Jesse looked at God, whom he had always worshipped, in horror. God's next action made him even more afraid. He strangled Jesse and brutally bit off one of his eyes, while declaring that he was extremely disappointed in humanity and that the old world must be destroyed to make way for new creations. He snapped his fingers and brought Jesse closer to Tulip so that he could enjoy his last moments. At the same time, at the Holy Grail fortress, Messiah, the Son of God, who had been released by Jesse, was found by Star. Messiah took to the stage and danced a dance that signaled that all the nuclear bombs in the world would be detonated. They would cleanse the lands that were gradually losing faith. In the past, God also brought natural disasters to destroy the dinosaurs, a species that he once loved, but ate feces right in front of him. That action made him feel offended and angry, causing the dinosaurs to completely become extinct. After creating humans in his image, God realized that with the development of the technological age, humans no longer needed him. Faith and prayer gradually faded, making God extremely disappointed and feel betrayed. Unable to bear this, he decided to detonate all nuclear weapons in the world, destroying the world again to start over. This sacred mission was given to Messiah, his descendant, because compared to greedy and selfish humans, Messiah is more innocent and pure, so it is easy for God to accept. He loved him so much that just because the stylist hurt Messiah, he slapped him so hard that he flew into the wall. Meanwhile, Jesse, after being resurrected, found Casty and Tulip. The two were shocked and overjoyed to see Jesse alive again. They discussed for a while and decided to go to the Holy Grail headquarters to kill Messiah, to prevent the apocalypse. Before leaving, they also called the couple who were still fighting non-stop to come and support. The two immortals, after witnessing Jesse's constant life and death and wandering hell, had no choice but to follow. The three of them flew to the Holy Grail headquarters and passed all the challenges. They were told to treat Genus, the child of an angel and a demon, well. However, when they reached the main hall, a gust of wind blew by, and Jesse turned around to find that Casty had disappeared. The two searched for a while but could not find Casty, so they had to focus on finding Messiah first. Meanwhile, the elevator suddenly had a problem. Jesse let Tulip step on him to climb up the elevator to try to fix it, but God was waiting outside. He took Tulip to a room and told her that he would give her a chance to prevent the world from being destroyed. Tulip initially thought God wanted to test her, but unexpectedly, the bet was surprisingly simple. God took out a stopwatch and said that if she could hold back from hitting him for 1 minute, he would cancel the apocalypse. Tulip happily agreed. At first, she could still hold back, but when God mentioned her and Jesse's child, who had died according to his plan, Tulip could not bear it anymore. As soon as the time was up, God slapped her, sending her flying, and then took a basin of blood. On the other side, Jesse escaped from the elevator and found Casty lying on the ground, having been beaten by God to the point that only his head remained. When Jesse wanted to save Casty, he apologized again, saying that he had failed to keep his limits and agreed to God's conditions. Immediately after, God knocked Jesse unconscious from behind, and then used a basin of blood to restore Casty's body. After finishing, he took Jesse to the church, leaving Jesse extremely confused. He did not understand why God wanted to destroy the world and kill everyone, but still focused on him. When Jesse questioned, God revealed his true motive. He wanted to take Genus in Jesse's body, a power that he was somewhat afraid of. God challenged Jesse to use the holy word to attack him, but Jesse was afraid that if he did, Genus would be taken away by God, so he kept silent. In a rage, God swung his arm and sent Jesse flying. Jesse knew that even if he died, Genus would still follow his soul to hell, so he decided not to use this power. At the same time, the main door of the church suddenly opened and Center appeared. Jesse thought that the enemy of the enemy would save him, but in reality, it was not so. Center came to kill him. Previously, where Jesse fell to his death, Center and God had met. Center intended to kill him to avenge his wife and child, but God threatened him with his daughter. So this time, Jesse was really in danger. God handed Jesse over to Center and left. Just as Center was about to take action, Genus's mother appeared in time. The struggle between the divine gun and the holy sword turned into a fierce battle, but in the end, he still couldn't win and was killed one by Center. Before dying, the angel told Jesse that he felt the power of Center's gun, enough to kill anyone, even God. In this situation, Jesse had no way to convince Center anymore. When he was about to accept his fate, the scene suddenly changed. Jesse took the holy sword and killed Center. At the same time, the countdown timer in the exhibition room also reached 0. However, Messiah did not go on stage to dance anymore. It turned out that although he was stupid, Messiah understood that if he jumped, someone would die, so he didn't dare to do it. Casty intended to force Messiah onto the stage, but Tulip appeared in time. It turned out that the person God killed earlier was not Tulip, but a Holy Grail member who had been hiding here from the beginning because he was afraid of the apocalypse. After Tulip woke up, she decided to kill Messiah to prevent the apocalypse, but Casty did not agree. God had previously promised Casty that as soon as the apocalypse began, he would return his dead relatives from the past to him, so Casty absolutely would not let Tulip ruin the plan. The two immediately rushed into a fight, a confrontation between a long-lost relative and a current lover. After being shot a few times, Casty finally grabbed the gun and killed Messiah. This action showed that he still could not give up on the current people. At the same time, the door of the room opened, and Jesse's group reunited once again. The god in the exhibition hall sensed the death of the Messiah. Realizing that he had failed this time, he rode away on his chariot. Soon after, Jesse arrived at the exhibition hall. In front of the fanatical followers, he declared that the apocalypse would not happen. He used the holy word to turn off all the TVs that were broadcasting live, then used the power of Genus to control the followers present, forcing them to find God. Jesse quickly found the whereabouts of God, who seemed to have been waiting for him all along. God was about to tear Jesse apart because he had lost Genus. But one sentence from Jesse shocked him. Jesse bluntly declared that he would not love God, that he, the human, was the one who deserved to be loved. At this moment, Jesse seemed to have awakened. He said that although humans are not perfect, humans are still a miracle created by God, and God should not arbitrarily wipe them out. After saying that, he left, leaving God confused. God had no choice but to return to heaven and found that all his subordinates had been killed, which was done by Center. It turned out that Center had previously willingly been killed by Jesse because Jesse wanted to use God's rules to send him to heaven. No matter how many sins he committed, as long as he sincerely repented, Center could still go to heaven after death. His wife and children were imprisoned in heaven by God, and God would definitely return there in the end. The atmosphere between God and Center became tense. God tried to soothe Center and reminded Center to think of his wife and children. But at this time, Center had found his wife and children and was determined to take revenge. In the end, God was shot dead by Center. Center then slowly walked to the throne and sat down, becoming the new god. 40 years had passed. At this time, Jesse and Tulip had both passed away, and their children had grown up. Only Casty remained the same as ever. If nothing unexpected happened, he would continue to witness each generation of people being born, growing up, and growing old. This was the last time Casty visited his old friends. Then he turned and left. However, this time Casty did not use an umbrella or try to avoid the sun. He let the sunlight erase the difference he carried with him from this world. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.